Chapter 14 of What Befell at Row. At my captor's bidding, I mounted the horse which they had untethered from the carriage, and we started off along the road which the coach itself had disappeared upon a moment before. But we traveled at a gentle trot, which, after that evening's furious riding, was welcome to me. With bitterness I reflected, as I rode, that the very moment at which Mademoiselle de Canaples had brought herself to think better of me was like to prove the last we should spend together. Yet not altogether bitter was that reflection, for with it came also the consolation, whereof I had told her, that I had not been taken before she had cause to change her mind concerning me. That she should care for me was too preposterous an idea to be nourished, and, indeed, it was better, much better, that M. de Montresor had come before I, grown sanguine as lovers will, had again earned her scorn by showing her what my heart contained. Much better was it that I should pass forever out of her life, as, indeed, methought I was like to pass out of all life, whilst I could leave in her mind a kind remembrance and a grateful regret, free from stain that a subsequent possible presumption of mine might have cast over it. Then my thoughts shifted to Andrea. St. Alban would hear my removal, and I cared not to think of what profit he might derive from it. To Yvonne also his presence must hereafter be a menace, and in that wherein tonight he had failed, he might, again, succeed. It was at this juncture of my reverie that M. de Montresor's pleasant young voice aroused me. "You appear downcast, M. de Lignes." "I downcast?" I echoed, throwing back my head and laughing. "Nay, I was but thinking." "Believe me, M. de Lignes," he said kindly, "when I tell you that it grieves me to be charged with this matter. I have done my best to capture you. That was my duty. But I should have rejoiced that I failed with the consciousness of having done all in my power." "Thanks, Montresor," I murmured, and silence followed. "I have been thinking, monsieur," he went on presently, "that possibly the absence of your sword causes you discomfort." Discomfort? It does, most damnably. Give me your parole d'honneur that you will attempt no escape, and not only shall your sword be returned to you, but you shall travel to Paris with all comfort and dignity. Now, so amazed was I that I paused to stare at the officer who was young enough to make such a proposal to a man of my reputation. He turned his face towards me, and in the moonlight I could make out his questioning glance. "Eh bien, monsieur? I am more than grateful to you, M. de Montresor," I replied, "and I freely give you my word of honor to seek no means of eluding you, nor to avail myself of any that may be presented to me." I said this loud enough for those behind to hear, so that no surprise was evinced when the lieutenant bade the man who bore my sword return it to me. If he who may chance to read these simple pages shall have gathered aught of my character from their perusal, he will marvel, perchance, that I should give a lieutenant my parole, instead rather watching for an opportunity to, at least, attempt an escape. Preeminent in my thoughts, however, stood at that moment the necessity to remove St. Alban, and methought that by acting as I did I saw a way by which haply I might accomplish this. What might thereafter befall me seemed of little moment. "M. de Montresor," I said presently, "your kindness impels me to set a further tax upon your generosity. That is, monsieur, bid your men fall back a little, and I will tell you." He made a sign to his troopers, and when the distance between us had been sufficiently widened, I began. "There is a man at present across the river, yonder, who has done me no little injury, and with whom I have a rendezvous at 9 o'clock tonight at St. Sulpice de Row, where our swords are to determine the difference between us. I crave, monsieur, your permission to keep that appointment." "Impossible," he answered curtly. I took a deep breath like a man who is about to jump an obstacle in his path. "Why impossible, monsieur?" "Because you are a prisoner, and therefore no longer under obligation to keep appointments. How would you feel, Montresor, if, burning to be avenged upon a man who had done you irreparable wrong, you were arrested an hour before the time at which you were to meet this man, sword in hand, and your captor, whose leave you craved to keep the assignation, answered you with the word impossible?" "Yes, yes, monsieur," he replied impatiently, "but you forget my position. Let us suppose that I allow you to go to St. Sulpice de Row. What if you do not return?" "You mistrust me?" I exclaimed, my hopes melting. "You misapprehend me. I mean, what if you are killed? I do not think that I shall be. But what if you are? What shall I say to my Lord Cardinal? Dame, that I am dead, and that he has saved the trouble of hanging me. The most he can want of me is my life. Let's suppose that you had come an hour later. You would have been forced to wait until after the encounter. And did I fall, matters would be no different. The young man fell to thinking, but I, knowing that it is not well to let the young ponder overlong if you would bend them to your wishes, broken upon his reflections. See, Montresor, yonder are the lights of Blois. By 8 o'clock we shall be in the town. Come, grant me leave to cross the Loire, and by 10 o'clock, or half past at the latest, I shall return to sup with you, or I shall be dead. I swear it. Were I in your position, he answered musingly, I know how I would be treated, and pardieu, come what may, I shall deal with you accordingly. You may go to your assignation, M. de Lins, and may God prosper you. And thus it came to pass that shortly after 8 o'clock, albeit a prisoner, I rode into the courtyard of the List of France, and, alighting, I stepped across the threshold of the inn and strode up to a table at which I had espied Michelot. He sat nursing a huge measure of wine, into the depths of which he was gazing pensively, with an expression so glum upon his weather-beaten countenance that it defies depicting. So deep was he in his meditations, that albeit I stood by the table surveying him for a full minute, he took no heed of me. Allons, Michelot, I said at length, wake up. He started up with a cry of amazement. Surprise chased away the grief that had been on his face, and a moment later joy unfeigned and good to see took the place of surprise. You have escaped, monsieur, he cried, and albeit caution made him utter the words beneath his breath, a shout seemed to lurk somewhere in a whisper. Pressing his hand, I sat down and briefly told him how matters stood, and how I came to be for the moment free. And when I had done, I bade him, since his wound had not proved serious, to get his hat and cloak and go with me to find a boat. He obeyed me, and a quarter of an hour after we had quitted the hostelry, he was rowing me across the stream, whilst, wrapped in my cloak, I sat in the stern, thinking of Yvonne. Monsieur, said Michelot, observe how swift is the stream. If I were to let the boat drift, we should be at Tours tomorrow, and from there it would be easy to defy pursuit. We have enough money to reach Spain. What say you, monsieur? Say, you rascal? Why, bend your back to the work and set me ashore by St. Sulpice in a quarter of an hour, or I'll forget that you have been my friend. Would you see me dishonored sooner than see you dead? He grumbled as he resumed his task. Thereafter, whilst he rowed, Michelot entertained me with some quaint ideas touching that which fine gentlemen call honor, and to what sorry passes it was wont to bring them, concluding by thanking God that he was no gentleman and had no honor to lead him into mischief. At last, however, our journey came to an end, and I sprang ashore some 500 paces from the little chapel, and almost exactly opposite the Suitors de Canaples. I stood for a moment gazing across the water at the lighted windows of the chateau, wondering which of those eyes that looked out upon the night might be that of Yvonne's chamber. Then, bidding Michelot await me, or follow did I not return in half an hour, I turned and moved away toward the chapel. There is a clearing in front of the little white edifice, which rather than a temple is but a monument to the martyr who is said to have perished on that spot in the days before Clovis. As I advanced into the center of this open patch of ground, and stood clear of the black silhouettes of the trees, cast about me by the moon, two men appeared to detach themselves from the side wall of the chapel and advance to meet me, albeit they were wrapped in their cloaks, up-tilted behind by their protruding scabbards. It was not difficult to tell the tall figure and stately bearing of St. Aubin and the mincing gait of Vilmorin. I doffed my hat in a grave salutation, which was courteously returned. I trust, messrs, that I have not kept you waiting? I was on the point of expressing that very hope, monsieur, returned St. Aubin. We have but arrived. Do you come alone? As you perceive. M. le Vicomte, then, will act for both of us. I bowed in token of my satisfaction, and without more ado cast aside my cloak, pleased to see that the affair was to be conducted with decency and politeness, as such matters should ever be conducted, albeit impoliteness may have marked their origin. The Marquis, having followed my example and divested himself of his cloak and hat, unsheathed his rapier and delivered it to Vilmorin, who came across with it to where I stood. When he was close to me, I saw that he was deadly pale. His teeth chattered, and the hand that held the weapon shook as with a palsy. "Moo, monsieur," he stammered. "Will it please you to lend me your sword that I may measure it? What formalities?" I exclaimed with an amused smile, as I complied with his request. "I am afraid you have caught a chill, Vicomte. The night air is little suited to health so delicate." He answered me with a baleful glance, as silently he took my sword and set it point a hilt with St. Albans. He appeared to have found some slight difference in the length, for he took 2 steps away from me, holding the weapons well in the light, where for a moment he surveyed them attentively. His hands shook, so that the blades clattered one against the other the while. But of a sudden, taking both rapiers by the hilt, he struck the blades together with a ringing clash, then flung them both behind him as far as he could contrive, leaving me thunderstruck with amazement, and marveling whether fear had robbed him of his wits. Not until I perceived that the trees around me appeared to spring into life did it occur to me that that clashing of blades was a signal, and that I was trapped. With the realization of it, I was upon Vilmorin in a bound, and with both hands I had caught the dog by the throat before he thought of flight. The violence of my onslaught bore him to the ground, and I, not to release my choking grip, went with him. For a moment we lay together where we had fallen, his slender body twisting and writhing under me, his swelling face upturned, and protruding, horror-stricken eyes gazing into mine that were fierce and pitiless. Voices rang above me. Someone stooped and strove to pluck me from my victim. Then below the left shoulder I felt a sting of pain, first cold and hot, and I knew that I had been stabbed. Again I felt the blade thrust in, lowered down and driven deeper. Then, as the knife was for the second time withdrawn and my flesh sucked at the steel, the pain of it sending a shudder through me, the instinct of preservation overcame the sweet lust to strangle Vilmorin. I let him go and, staggering to my feet, I turned to face those murderers who struck a defenseless man behind. Swords gleamed around me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I counted, and stood weak and dazed from loss of blood, gazing stupidly at the white blades. Had I but had my sword, I should have laid about me, and gone down beneath their blows, as befits a soldier. But the absence of that trusty friend left me limp and helpless, cowed for the first time since I had borne arms. Of a sudden, I became aware that St. Albans stood opposite to me, hand on hip, surveying me with a malicious leer. As our eyes met, "So, Master Meddler," quoth he mockingly, "you crow less lustily than is your wont." "Hound," I gasped, choking with rage, "if you are a man, if there be a spark of pride or honor left in your lying, cowardly soul, order your assassins to give me my sword, and, wounded though I be, I'll fight with you this duel that you lured me here to fight." He laughed harshly. "I told you but this morning, Master Duins, that a St. Alban does not fight men of your stamp. You force a rendezvous upon me. You shall reap the consequences." Despite the weakness arising from loss of blood, I sprang towards him, beside myself with fury. But ere I had covered half the distance that lay between us, my arms were gripped from behind, and in my spent condition I was held there, powerless, at the Marquis's mercy. He came slowly forward until we were but some 2 feet apart. For a second he stood leering at me. Then, raising his hand, he struck a man whose arms another held, full upon the face. Passion for the moment lent me strength, and in that moment I had wrenched my right arm free and returned his blow with interest. With an oath, he got out a dagger that hung from his baldric, saying, "Do Christ, take that, you dog," he snarled, burying the blade in my breast as he spoke. "My God, you are murdering me." I gasped. "Have you discovered it?" "What penetration," he retorted, and those about him laughed at his indecent jest. He made a sign, and the man who had held me withdrew his hands. I staggered forward, deprived of support, then a crashing blow took me across the head. I swayed for an instant, and with arms upheld I clutched at the air, as if I sought, by hanging to it, to save myself from falling. Then the moon appeared to go dark, a noise as of the sea beating upon its shore filled my ears, and I seemed to be falling, a voice that buzzed and vibrated oddly, growing more distant at each word, reached me as I sank. "Come," it said, "fling that carrion into the river." Then nothingness engulfed me. Chapter 15. Of my resurrection. Even as the blow which had plunged me into senselessness had imparted to me the sinking sensation which I have feebly endeavored to depict, so did the first dim ray of returning consciousness bring with it the feeling that I was again being buoyed upwards through the thick waters that had enveloped me, to their surface, where intelligence and wakefulness awaited. And as I felt myself borne up and up in that effortless ascension, my senses awake and my reason still half dormant, an exquisite sense of languor pervaded my whole being. Presently meseemed that the surface was gained at last, and an instinct impelled me to open my eyes upon the light, of which, through closed lids, I had become conscious. I beheld a fair-sized room superbly furnished, and flooded with amber sunlight suggestive in itself of warmth and luxury, the vision of which heightened the delicious torpor that held me in thrall. The bed I lay upon was such, I told myself, as would not have disgraced a royal sleeper. It was upheld by great pillars of black oak, carved with score of fantastic figures, and all around it, descending from the dome above, hung curtains of rich damask, drawn back at the side that looked upon the window. Near at hand stood a table laden with phials, and such utensils as one sees by the bedside of the wealthy sick. All this I beheld in a languid, unreasoning fashion through my half-open lids, and albeit the luxury of the room and the fine linen of my bed told me that this was neither my Paris lodging in the Rue Saint-Antoine, nor yet my chamber at the hostelry of the Lys de France, still I taxed not my brain with any questions touching my whereabouts. I closed my eyes, and I must have slept again. When next I opened them, a burly figure stood in the deep bay of the lattice window, looking out through the leaded panes. I recognized the stalwart frame of Michelot, and at last I asked myself where I might be. It did not seem to occur to me that I had but to call him to receive an answer to that question. Instead, I closed my eyes again and essayed to think. But just then there came a gentle scratching at the door, and I could hear Michelot tiptoeing across the room. Next he and the one he had admitted tiptoed back toward my bedside, and as they came I caught a whisper in a voice that seemed to drag me to full consciousness. "How fares the poor invalid this morning?" "The fever is gone, mademoiselle, and he may wake at any moment. Indeed, it is strange that he should sleep so long. He will be the better for it when he does awaken. I will remain here while you rest. Michelot, my poor fellow, you are almost as war with your vigils as he is with the fever." "Pooh! I am strong enough, mademoiselle," he answered. "I will get a mouthful of food in return, for I will be by when he wakes." Then their voices sank so low that as they withdrew, I caught not what was said. The door closed softly, and for a space there was silence, broken at last by a sigh above my head. With an answering sigh, I opened wide my eyes and feasted them upon the lovely face of Yvonne de Canaples, as she bent over me with a look of tenderness and pity that at once recalled to me our parting when I was arrested. But suddenly meeting the stare of my gaze, she drew back with a half-stifled cry, whose meaning my dull wit sought not to interpret, but methought I caught from her lips the words, "Thank God!" "Where am I, mademoiselle?" I inquired, and the faintness of my voice amazed me. "You know me!" she exclaimed, as though the thing were a miracle. Then coming forward again, and setting her cool, sweet hand upon my forehead. "Hush!" she murmured in the accents one might use to soothe a child. "You are at Canaples, among friends. Now sleep." "At Canaples?" I echoed. "How came I here? I am a prisoner, am I not?" "A prisoner!" she exclaimed. No, you're not a prisoner. You are among friends." Did I then but dream that Montresor arrested me yesterday on the road to Meung? Ah, I recollect. De Montresor gave me leave on parole to go to Roe. Then, like an avalanche, remembrance swept down upon me, and my memory drew a vivid picture of the happenings at St. Sulpice. "My God!" I cried. "Am I not dead, then?" And I sought to struggle up into a sitting posture, but that gentle hand upon my forehead restrained and robbed me of all will that was not hers. "Hush, monsieur," she said softly. "Lie still. By a miracle and the faithfulness of Michelot you live. Be thankful, be content, and sleep." "But my wounds, mademoiselle?" I inquired feebly. "They are healed." "Healed?" quoth I, and in my amazement my voice sounded louder than it had yet done since my awakening. "Healed? 3 such wounds as I took last night, to say naught of a broken head. Healed? 'T was not last night, monsieur." "Not last night? Was it not last night that I went a row?" "It is nearly a month since that took place," she answered with a smile. "For nearly a month have you lain unconscious upon that bed, with the angel of death at your pillow. You have fought and won a silent battle. Now sleep, monsieur, and ask no more questions until next you awaken, when Michelot shall tell you all that took place." She held a glass to my lips from which I drank gratefully. Then, with the submissiveness of a babe, I obeyed her and slept, as she had promised. It was Michelot who greeted me when next I opened my eyes, on the following day. There were tears in his eyes that looked grim and unmoved upon the horrors of the battlefield. From him I learned how, after they had flung me into the river, deeming me dead already, St. Aubin and his men had made off. The swift stream swirled me along towards the spot where, in the boat, Michelot awaited my return, all unconscious of what was taking place. He had heard the splash, and had suddenly stood up on the point of going ashore, when my body rose within a few feet of him. He spoke of the agony of mind wherewith he had suddenly stretched forth and clutched me by my doublet, fearing that I was indeed dead. He had lifted me into the boat to find that my heart still beat and that the blood flowed from my wounds. These he had there and then bound up in the only rude fashion he was master of, and forthwith, thinking of Andrea and the Chevalier de Canaples, who were my friends, and of Mademoiselle, who was my debtor, also seeing that the chateau was the nearest place, he had rowed straight across the Canaples, and there I had lain during the 4 weeks that had elapsed, nursed by Mademoiselle, Andrea, and himself, and thus won back to life. Ah, Dieu! How good it was to know that someone there was still who cared for worthless Gaston de Liens a little, enough to watch beside him, and withhold his soul from the grim claws of death. What of M. de St. Aubin? I inquired presently. He has not been seen since that night. Probably he feared that did he come to Blois, the Chevalier would find means of punishing him for the attempted abduction of Mademoiselle. Ah, then Andrea is safe? As if in answer to my question, the lad entered at that moment, and upon seeing me sitting up, talking to Michelot, he uttered an exclamation of joy and hurried forward to my bedside. "Gaston, dear friend," he cried as he took my hand, and a thin, withered hand it was. We talked long together, we three, and anon we were joined by the Chevalier de Canaples, who offered me also, in his hesitating manner, his felicitations. And with me, they lingered until Yvonne came to drive them with protestations from my bedside. Such, in brief, was the manner of my resurrection. For a week or so I still kept my chamber. Then one day toward the middle of April, the weather being warm and the sun bright, Michelot assisted me to don my clothes, which hung strangely empty upon my gaunt, emaciated frame, and, leaning heavily upon my faithful henchman, I made my way below. In the salon I found the Chevalier de Canaples with Mademoiselle and Andrea awaiting me, and the kindness where they overwhelmed me, as I sat propped up with pillows, was such that I asked myself again and again if, indeed, I was that same Gaston de Liens who but a little while ago had held himself as destitute of friends as he was of fortune. I was the pampered hero of the hour, and even little Genevieve had a sunny smile and a kind word for me. Thereafter my recovery progressed with great strides, and gradually, day by day, I felt more like my old vigorous self. They were happy days, for Mademoiselle was often at my side and ever kind to me. So kind was she that presently, as my strength grew, there fell a great cloud athwart my happiness. The thought that soon I must leave Canaples never to return there, leave Mademoiselle's presence never to come into it again. I was Monsieur de Montresor's prisoner. I had learned that in common with all others, save those at Canaples, he deemed me dead, and that, informed by a message from St. Aubin, he had returned to Paris on the day following that of my journey to Rome. Nevertheless, since I lived, he had my parole, and it was my duty as soon as I had regained sufficient strength to journey to Paris and deliver myself into his hands. Nearer and nearer drew the dreaded hour in which I felt that I must leave Canaples. On the last day of April, I essayed a fencing bout with Andrea, and so strong and supple did I prove myself that I was forced to realize that the time was come. On the morrow I would go. As I was on the point of returning indoors with the foils under my arm, Andrea called me back. "Gaston, I have something of importance to say to you. Will you take a turn with me down yonder by the river?" There was a serious, almost nervous look on his comely face, which arrested my attention. I dropped the foils, and taking his arm, I went with him as he bade me. We seated ourselves on the grass by the edge of the gurgling waters, and he began. "It is now 2 months since we came to Blois. I, to pay my court to the wealthy Mademoiselle de Canaples. You, to watch over and protect me. Nay, you need not interrupt me. Michelot has told me what St. Aubin sought here, and the true motives of your journey. to Saint Sulpice. Never shall I be able to sufficiently prove my gratitude to you, my poor Gaston. But tell me, dear friend, you who from the outset saw how matters stood, why did you not inform St. Aubin that he had no cause to hunt me down, since I intended not to come between him and Yvonne? Mon Dieu, I exclaimed, that little fair-haired coquette has. Gaston, he interrupted, you go too fast. I love Genevieve de Canaples. I have loved her, I think, since the moment I beheld her in the inn at Choisy, and what is more, she loves me. So that, I asked with an ill-repressed sneer, we have plighted our troth, and with her father's sanction, or without it, she will do me the honor to become my wife. Admirable, I exclaimed, and my Lord Cardinal may hang himself on a stove for aught I care. Ah, truly a dutiful expression for a nephew who has thwarted his uncle's plans. My uncle's plans are like himself, cold and selfish in their ambition. Andrea, whatever your uncle may be, to those of your blood at least, he was never selfish. Not selfish, he cried. Think you that he is enriching and contracting great alliances for us because he loves us? No, no. Our uncle seeks to gain our support, and with the support of those noble houses to which he is allying us, the nobility opposes him. Therefore he seeks to find relatives among noblemen, so that he may weather the storm at which his far-seeing eyes have already detected the first dim clouds. What to him are my feelings, my inclinations, my affections, things of no moment, to be sacrificed so that I may serve him in the manner that will bring him the most profit? Yet you call him not selfish. Were he not selfish, I should go to him and say, I love Genevieve de Canaples. Create me duke as you would do. Did I wed her sister, and the Chevalier de Canaples will not withstand our union? What think you would be his answer? I have a shrewd idea what his answer would be, I replied slowly. Also, I have a shrewd idea of what he will say when he learns in what manner you defied his wishes. He can but order me away from court, or, at most, banish me from France. And then what will become of you and your wife? What is to become of us? He cried in a tone that was almost that of anger. Think you that I am a pauper dependent upon my uncle's bounty? I have an estate near Palermo, which, for all that it does not yield riches, is yet sufficient to enable us to live with dignity and comfort. I have told Genevieve, and she is content. I looked at his flushed face and laughed. Well, well, said I, if you are resolved upon it, it is ended. He appeared to meditate for a moment. Then, we have decided to be married by the cure of Saint Innocent on the day after tomorrow. Credo, I answered with a whistle. You have wasted no time in determining your plans. Does Yvonne know of it? We have dared tell nobody, he replied, and a moment later he added hesitatingly, You, I know, will not betray us. Do you know me so little that you doubt me on that score? Have no fear, Andrea, I shall not speak. Beside, tomorrow or the next day at latest, I leave Canaples. You do not mean that you are returning to the list of France? No, I am going farther than that. I am going to Paris. To Paris? To Paris. To deliver myself up to M. de Montresor, who gave me leave to go to Rome some 7 weeks ago. But it is madness, Gaston, he ejaculated. All virtue is madness in a world so sinful. Nevertheless, I go. In a measure, I am glad that things have fallen out with you as they have done, for when the news goes abroad that you have married Genevieve de Canaples and left the heiress free, your enemies will vanish, and you will have no further need of me. New enemies you will have perchance, but in your strife with them I could lend you no help, were I by. He sat in silence, casting pebbles into the stream, and watching the ripples they made upon the face of the waters. Have you told mademoiselle? He asked at length. Not yet. I shall tell her today. You also, Andrea, must take her into your confidence touching your approaching marriage. That she will prove a good friend to you, I am assured. But what reason shall I give for my secrecy? He inquired, and inwardly I smiled to see how the selfishness which love begets in us had caused him already to forget my affairs, and how the thought of his own approaching union effaced all thought of me and the doom to which I went. Give no reason, I answered. Let Genevieve tell her what you contemplate, and if a reason she must have, let Genevieve bid her come to me. This much will I do for you in the matter. Indeed, Andrea, it is a last service I am like to render you. Essay, Here Comes the Chevalier. She shall be told today. Chapter 16, The Way of Woman. For all that I realized that this love of mine for Yvonne was as a child stillborn, a thing that had no existence save in the heart that had begotten it, I rejoiced meanly at the thought that she was not destined to become Andrea's wife. For since I understood that this woman, who to me was like no other of her sex, was not for so poor a thing as Gaston like the dog in the fable, I wished that no other might possess her. Inevitable it seemed that sooner or later one must come who would woo and win her. But ere that befell, my Lord Cardinal would have meted out justice to me. The justice of the rope me seemed, and I should not be by to gnash my teeth in jealousy. That evening, when the Chevalier de Canaples had gone pay a visit to his vineyard, the thing that, next to himself, he loved most in this world, and whilst Genevieve and Andrea were vowing a deathless love to each other in the rose garden, their favorite haunt when the Chevalier was absent, I seized the opportunity for making my adieus to Yvonne. We were leaning together upon the balustrade of the terrace, and our faces were turned toward the river and the wooded shores beyond, a landscape that was as alive and beautiful now as it had been dead and gray when first I came to Canaples 2 months ago. Scarce were my first words spoken when she turned towards me, and methought, but I was mad. I told myself that there was a catch in her voice as she exclaimed, "You are leaving us, monsieur? Tomorrow morning I shall crave, monsieur, your father's permission to quit Canaples." "But why, monsieur? Have we not made you happy here?" "So happy, mademoiselle," I answered with fervor, "that at times it passes my belief that I am indeed Gaston de Liens. But go I must. My honor demands of me this sacrifice." And in answer to the look of astonishment that filled her wondrous eyes, I told her what I had told Andrea touching my parole to Montresor and the necessity of its redemption. As Andrea had done, she also dubbed it madness, but her glance was, nevertheless, so full of admiration that methought to have earned it was worth the immolation of liberty, of life perchance. Who could say? "Before I go, mademoiselle," I pursued, looking straight before me as I spoke, and dimly conscious that her glance was bent upon my face, "before I go, I fain would thank you for all that you have done for me here. Your care has saved my life. Mademoiselle, your kindness, methinks, has saved my soul. For it seems to me that I am no longer the same man whom Michelot fished out of the Loire that night 2 months ago. I would thank you, mademoiselle, for the happiness that has been mine during the past few days, a happiness such as for years has not fallen to my lot. To another and worthier man, the task of thanking you might be an easy one. But to me, who know myself to be so far beneath you, the obligation is so overwhelming that I know of no words to fitly express it. Monsieur, I beseech you, already you have said overmuch. Nay, mademoiselle, not half enough. Have you forgotten, then, what you did for me? Our trivial service to you is but unseemly recompense. What other man would have come to my rescue as you came, with such odds against you, and forgetting the affronting words wherewith that very day I had met your warning? Tell me, monsieur, who would have done that? Why, any man who deemed himself a gentleman, and who possessed such knowledge as I had." She laughed a laugh of unbelief. "You are mistaken, sir," she answered. "The deed was worthy of one of those pur chevaliers we've read of, and I have never known but one man capable of accomplishing it. Those words and the tone wherein they were uttered set my brain on fire. I turned toward her. Our glances met, and her eyes, those eyes that but a while ago had never looked on me without avowing disdain wherein she had held me, were now filled with light of kindliness, of sympathy, of tenderness that seemed more than I could endure. Already my hand was thrust into the bosom of my doublet, and my fingers were about to drag forth that little shred of green velvet that I found in the coppice on the day of her abduction, and that I had kept ever since, as one keeps the relic of a departed saint. Another moment, and I should have poured out the story of the mad, hopeless passion that filled my heart to bursting, when a sudden Yvonne, came Genevieve's fresh voice from the other end of the terrace. The spell of that moment was broken. Methought mademoiselle made a little gesture of impatience as she answered her sister's call. Then, with a word of apology, she left me. Half dazed by the emotions that had made sport of me, I leaned over the balustrade, and with my elbows on the stone and my chin on my palms, I stared stupidly before me, thanking God for having sent Genevieve in time to save me from again earning mademoiselle's scorn. For as I grew sober, I did not doubt that with scorn she would have met the wild words that already trembled on my lips. I laughed harshly and aloud, such a laugh as those in Helme Vent. Gaston, Gaston, I muttered. At 32, you are more fool than ever you were at 20. I told myself then that my fancy had vested her tone and look with a kindliness far beyond that which they contained. And as I thought of how I had deemed impatient the little gesture wherewith she had greeted Genevieve's interruption, I laughed again. From the reverie into which, naturally enough, I lapsed, it was Mademoiselle who aroused me. She stood beside me with an unrest of manner so unusual in her, that straightway I guessed the substance of her talk with Genevieve. So, Mademoiselle, I said, without waiting for her to speak, you have learned what is afoot? I have, she answered. That they love each other is no news to me. That they intend to wed does not surprise me. But that they should contemplate a secret marriage passes my comprehension. I cleared my throat as men will when about to embark upon a perilous subject with no starting point determined. It is time, mademoiselle, I began, that you should learn the true cause of M. de Mancini's presence at Canaples. It will enlighten you touching his motives for a secret wedding. Had things fallen out as was intended by those who planned his visit, Monsieur your father and my Lord Cardinal, it is improbable that you would ever have heard that which it now becomes necessary that I should tell you. I trust, mademoiselle, I continued, that you will hear me in a neutral spirit, without permitting your personal feelings to enter into your consideration of that which I shall unfold. So long a preface augurs anything but well, she interposed, looking monstrous serious. Not ill, at least, I hope. Hear me, then. Your father and his eminence are friends. The one has a daughter who is said to be very wealthy and whom he, with fond ambition, desires to see wedded to a man who can give her an illustrious name. The other possesses a nephew whom he can ennoble by the highest title that a man may bear who is not a prince of the blood, and born indeed by few who are not, and whom he desires to see contract an alliance that will bring him enough of riches to enable him to bear his title with becoming dignity. I glanced at mademoiselle, whose cheeks were growing an ominous red. Well, mademoiselle, I continued, your father and Monsignor Mazarin appear to have bared their heart's desire to each other, and M. de Mancini was sent to Canaples to woo and win your father's elder daughter. A long pause followed, during which she stood with face aflame, averted eyes, and heaving bosom, betraying the feelings that stormed within her at the disclosure of the bargain whereof she had been part. At length, "Oh, monsieur!" she exclaimed in a choking voice, and clenching her shapely hands. To think! I beseech you not to think, mademoiselle. I interrupted calmly, for, having taken the first plunge, I was now master of myself. The ironical little god, whom the ancients painted with bandaged eyes, has led M. de Mancini by the nose in this matter, and things have gone awry for the plotters. There, mademoiselle, you have the reason for a clandestine union. Did monsieur your father guess how Andrea's affections have, I caught the word miscarried betimes, and substituted, gone against his wishes, his opposition is not a thing to be doubted. Are you sure there is no mistake? She inquired after a pause. Is all this really true, monsieur? It is indeed. But how comes it that my father has seen naught of what has been so plain to me, that M. de Mancini was ever at my sister's side? Your father, mademoiselle, is much engrossed in his vineyard. Moreover, when the chevalier has been at hand, he has been careful to show no greater regard for the one than for the other of you. I instructed him in this duplicity many weeks ago. She looked at me for a moment. Oh, monsieur, she cried passionately, how deep is my humiliation! To think that I was made a part of so vile a bargain. Oh, I am glad that M. de Mancini has proved above the sordid task to which they set him, glad that he will dupe the cardinal and my father. So am not I, mademoiselle, I exclaimed. She vouchsafed me a stare of ineffable surprise. How? Diable, I answered. I am M. de Mancini's friend. It was to shield him that I fought your brother. Again, because of my attitude towards him, was it that I went perilously near assassination at Rho. Enemies sprang up about him when the cardinal's matrimonial projects became known. Your brother picked a quarrel with him. And when I had dealt with your brother, St. Alban appeared, and after St. Alban there were others. When it is known that he has played this trick upon Uncle Giulio, his enemies will disappear. But, on the other hand, his prospects will all be blighted, and for that I am sorry. So that was the motive of your duel with Eugene. At last you learn it. And, she added in a curious voice. You had been better pleased had Anna Mancini carried out his uncle's wishes? It matters little what I would think, mademoiselle, I answered guardedly, for I could not read that curious tone of hers. Nevertheless, I am curious to hear your answer. What answer could I make? The truth, that for all my fine talk, I was at heart and in a sense right glad that she was not to become Andrea's wife, would have seemed ungallant. Moreover, I must have added the explanation that I desired to see her no man's wife, so that I might not seem to contradict myself. Therefore, in truth, mademoiselle, I answered, lying glibly, it would have given me more pleasure had Andrea chosen to obey his eminence. Her manner froze upon the instant. In the consideration of your friend's advancement, she replied, half contemptuously, you forget, darlings, to consider me. Am I, then, a thing to be bartered into the hands of the first fortune hunter who woos me because he has been bidden so to do, and who is to marry me for political purposes? Pshaw, de Luynes, she added with a scornful laugh. After all, I was a fool to expect aught else from. She checked herself abruptly, and a sudden access of mercy left the stinging you unuttered. I stood by, dumb and sheepish, not understanding how the words that I had deemed gallant could have brought this tempest down upon my head. Before I could say aught that might have righted matters, or perchance made them worse, since you leave Canaples tomorrow, quoth she, I will say adieu, monsieur, for it is unlikely that we shall meet again. With a slight inclination of her head, and withholding her hand intentionally, she moved away, whilst I stood, as only a fool or statue would stand, and watched her go. Once she paused, and indeed half turned, whereupon hope knocked at my heart again. But before I had admitted it, she had resumed her walk towards the house. Hungrily I followed her graceful, lissom figure with my eyes until she had crossed the threshold. Then, with a dull ache in my breast, I flung myself upon a stone seat, and, addressing myself to the setting sun for want of better audience, I roundly cursed her sex for the knottiest puzzle that had ever plagued the mind of man in the unraveling. Chapter 17. Father and son. Gaston, quoth Andrea next morning, you will remain at Canaples until tomorrow? You must, for tomorrow I am to be wed, and I would fain have your good wishes ere you go. Nice hands, mine, to seek a benediction at, I grumbled, but you will remain? Come, Gaston, we have been good friends, you and I, and who knows when next we shall meet. Believe me, I shall value your Godspeed above all others. Likely enough, since it will be the only one you'll hear. But for all my sneers he was not be put off. He talked and coaxed so winningly that in the end, albeit I am a man not easily turned from the course he has set himself, the affectionate pleading in his fresh young voice and the affectionate look in his dark eyes won me to his way. Forthwith I went in quest of the Chevalier, whom, at the indication of a lackey, I discovered in the room it pleased him to call his study, that same room into which we had been ushered on the day of our arrival at Canaples. I told him that on the morrow I must set out for Paris, and albeit he at first expressed a polite regret, yet when I had shown him how my honor was involved in my speedy return thither, he did not urge me to put off my departure. It grieves me, sir, that you must go, and I deeply regret the motive that is taking you. Yet I hope that His Eminence, in recognition of the services you have rendered his nephew, will see fit to forget what cause for resentment he may have against you, and render you your liberty. If you will give me leave, monsieur, I will write to His Eminence in this strain, and you shall be the bearer of my letter. I thanked him, with a smile of deprecation, as I thought of the true cause of Mazarine's resentment, which was precisely that plea upon which M. de Canaples sought to obtain for me my liberation. And now, monsieur, he pursued nervously, touching Andrea and his visit here, I would say a word to you who are his friend, and may haply know something of his mind. It is over 2 months since he came here, and yet the affair which we had hoped to bring about seems no nearer its conclusion than when first he came. Of late I have watched him, and I have watched Yvonne. They are certainly good friends, yet not even the frail barrier of formality appears overcome betwixt them, and I am beginning to fear that Andrea is not only lukewarm in this matter, but is forgetful of his uncle's wishes, and selfishly indifferent to Monseigneur's projects and mine, which, as he well knows, are the reason of his sojourn at my chateau. What think you of this, M. de Luynes? He shot a furtive glance at me as he spoke, and with his long, lean forefinger, he combed his beard in a nervous fashion. I gave a short laugh to cover my embarrassment at the question. What do I think, monsieur? I echoed to gain time. Then, thinking that a sententious answer would be the most fitting, my FOI, love is as a spark that lies latent in flint and steel. For days and weeks these two may be as close together as you please, and naught will come of it. But one fine day the hand of chance, will strike the one against the other, and lo, the spark is born. You speak in parables, monsieur, was his caustic comment. 'Tis in parables that all religions are preached, I returned, and love, methinks, is a great religion in this world. Love, sir, love, he cried petulantly. The word makes me sick. What has love to do with this union? Love, sir, is a pretty theme for poets, romancers, and fools. The imagination of such a sentiment, for it is a sentiment that does not live save in imagination, may serve to draw peasants and other low-bred clods into wedlock. With such as we, with gentlemen, it is not to do. So let that be, monsieur. Andrea de Mancini came hither to wed my daughter. And I am certain, monsieur, I answered stoutly, that Andrea will wed your daughter. You speak with confidence. I know Andrea well. Signs that may be hidden to you are clear to me, and I have faith in my prophecy. He looked at me and fell a victim to my confidence of manner. The petulancy died out of his face. Well, we will hope. My Lord Cardinal is to create him Duke, and he will assume as title his wife's estate, becoming known to history as Andrea de Mancini, Duke of Canaples. Thus shall a great house be founded that will bear our name. You see the importance of it. Clearly. And how reasonable is my anxiety? Assuredly. And you are in sympathy with me? Pardieu, why else did I go so near to killing your son? True, he mused, then suddenly he added, apropos, have you heard that Eugene has become one of the leaders of these Frondeur madmen? Ah, then he is quite recovered. Unfortunately, he assented with a grimace, and thus our interview ended. That day wore slowly to its close. I wandered hither and thither in the chateau and the grounds, hungering throughout the long hours for a word with Mademoiselle, a glimpse of her, at least. But all day long she kept her chamber, the pretext being that she was beset by a migraine. By accident I came upon her that evening, at last, in the salon. Yet my advent was a signal for her departure, and all the words she had for me were, "Still at Canaples, monsieur? I thought you were to have left this morning." She looked paler than her wont, and her eyes were somewhat red. "I am remaining until tomorrow," said I awkwardly. "Raiment," was all she answered, and she was gone. Next morning the Chevalier and I breakfasted alone. Mademoiselle's migraine was worse. Genevieve was nursing, so her maid brought word, whilst Andrea had gone out an hour before and had not returned. The Chevalier shot me an apologetic glance across the board. "Tea is a poor Godspeed to you and the Leans." I made light of it and turned the conversation into an indifferent channel, wherein it abided until, filling himself a bumper of Anjou, the Chevalier solemnly drank to my safe journey and good fortune in Paris. At that moment, Andrea entered by the door abutting on the terrace balcony. He was flushed, and his eyes sparkled with a joyous fever. Profuse was he in his apologies, which, howbeit, were passing vague in character, and which he brought to a close by pledging me as the Chevalier had done already. As we rose, Genevieve appeared with the news that Yvonne was somewhat better, adding that she had come to take leave of me. Her composure surprised me gladly, for albeit in her eyes there was also a telltale light, the lids, demurely downcast as was her wont, amply screened it from the vulgar gaze. Andrew would tell his father-in-law of the marriage later in the day, and for all I am not a chicken-hearted man, still I had no stomach to be at hand when the storm broke. The moment having come for my departure, and Michelot awaiting me already with the horses in the courtyard, M. de Canaples left us to seek the letter which I was to carry to his eminence. So soon as the door had closed upon him, Andrea came forward, leading his bride by the hand, and asked me to wish them happiness. "With all my heart," I answered, "and if happiness be accorded you in a measure with the fervency of my wishes, then shall you, indeed, be happy. Each of you I congratulate upon the companion in life you have chosen. Cherish him, mesdemoiselles, madam, for he is loyal and true, and such are rare in this world." It is possible that I might have said more in this benign and fatherly strain, for it seemed to me that this new role I had assumed suited me wondrous well. But shadow that drew our eyes towards the nearest window interrupted me. And what we saw there drew a cry from Andrea, a shudder from Genevieve, and for me a gasp that was half amazement, half dismay. For, leaning upon the sill, surveying us with a sardonic, evil grin, we beheld Yvonne de Canaples, the man whom I had left with a sword thrust through his middle behind the Hotel Vendôme 2 months ago. Whence was he sprung, and why came he thus to his father's house? He started as I faced him, for doubtless St. Aubin had boasted him that he had killed me in a duel. For a moment he remained at the window. Then he disappeared, and we could hear the ring of his spurred heel as he walked along the balcony towards the door. And simultaneously came the quick, hurrying steps of the Chevalier de Canaples as he crossed the hall, returning with the letter he had gone to fetch. Genevieve shuddered again and looked fearfully from one door to the other. Andrea drew a sharp breath like a man in pain, whilst I rapped out an oath to brace my nerves for the scene which we all three foresaw. Then in silence we waited, some subtle instinct warning us of the disaster that impended. The steps on the balcony halted, and a second later those in the hall. And then, as though the thing had been rehearsed in time so that the spectators might derive the utmost effect from it, the doors opened together, and on the opposing thresholds, with the width of the room betwixt them, stood father and son confronted. Chapter 18. Of how I left Canaples. Whilst a man might tell a dozen, did those two remain motionless, the one eyeing the other, but their bearing was as widely different as their figures. Eugene's stalwart frame stood firm and erect. Insolence in every line of it, reflected perchance in the smile that lurked about the corners of his thin-lipped mouth. The hat, which he had not had the grace to doff, set jauntily upon his straight black hair, the jerkin of leather which he wore, and the stout sword which hung from the plainest of belts, all served to give him the air of a ruffler or tavern knight. The Chevalier, on the other hand, stood as if turned to stone. From his enervated fingers the letter fluttered to the ground, and on his pale, thin face was to be read a displeasure mixed with fear. At length, with an oath, the old man broke the silence. "What seek you at Canaples?" he asked in a quivering voice, as he advanced into the room. "Are you so dead to shame that you dare present yourself with such effrontery? Off with your hat, sir," he blazed, stamping his foot, and going from pale to crimson. "Off with your hat, or mort Dieu, I'll have you flung out of doors by my grooms." This show of vehemence, as sudden as it was unexpected, drew from Eugene a meek obedience that I had not looked for. Nevertheless, the young man's lip curled as he uncovered. "How fatherly is your greeting," he sneered. The Chevalier's eyes flashed a glance that lacked no venom at his son. "What manner of greeting did you look for?" he returned hotly. "Did you expect me to set a ring upon your finger, and have the fattened calf killed in honor of your return? Sang you, sir, have you come hither to show me how a father should welcome the profligate son who has dishonored his name? Why are you here unbidden? Answer me, sir." A deep flush overspread Eugene's cheeks. I had thought when I crossed the threshold that this was the Chateau de Canaples, or else that my name was Canaples. I know not which. Clearly I was mistaken, for here is a lady who has no word either of greeting or intercession for me, and who, therefore, cannot be my sister, and yonder a man whom I should never look to find in my father's house. I took a step forward, a hot answer on my lips, when from the doorway at my back came Yvonne's sweet voice. "Eugene, you here?" "As you see, sister, though had you delayed your coming, 'tis probable you would no longer have found me, for your father welcomes me with oaths and threatens me with his grooms." She cast a reproachful glance upon the Chevalier, neath which the anger seemed to die out of him. Then she went forward with hands outstretched and a sad smile upon her lips. "Yvonne!" The Chevalier's voice rang out sharp and sudden. She stopped. "I forbid you to approach that man." For a moment she appeared to hesitate. Then, leisurely pursuing her way, she set her hands upon her brother's shoulders and embraced him. The Chevalier swore through set teeth. Genevieve trembled, Andrea looked askance, and I laughed softly at the Chevalier's discomfiture. Eugene flung his hat and cloak into a corner and strode across the room to where his father stood. "And now, monsieur, since I've traveled all the way from Paris to save my house from a step that will bring it into the contempt of all France, I shall not go until you have heard me." The Chevalier shrugged his shoulders and made as if to turn away. Yvonne's greeting of her brother appeared to have quenched the spark of spirit, that for a moment had glimmered in the little man's breast. "Monsieur," cried Eugene, "believe me that what I have to say is of the utmost consequence, and say it I will, whether before these strangers or in your private ear shall be as you elect." The old man glanced about him, like one who seeks a way of escape. At last, "If say it you must," he growled, "say it here and now, and when you have said it, go." Eugene scowled at me, and from me to Andrea. To pay him for that scowl, I had it in my mind to stay, but overcoming the clownish thought, I took Andrea by the arm. "Come, Andrea," I said, "we will take a turn outside while these family matters are in discussion." I had a shrewd idea what was the substance of Eugene's mission to Canaples, to expostulate with his father touching the proposed marriage of Yvonne to the cardinal's nephew. Nor was I wrong, for when, some moments later, the Chevalier recalled us from the terrace, where we were strolling, "What think you he has come hither to tell me?" he inquired as we entered. He pointed to his son as he spoke, and passion shook his slender frame as the breeze shakes a leaf. Mademoiselle and Genevieve sat hand in hand, Yvonne deadly pale, Genevieve weeping. "What think you?" he has the effrontery to say. "Tête-à-deux, it seems that he has profited little by the lesson you read him in the horse market about meddling in matters which concern him not. He has come hither to tell me that he will not permit his sister to wed the cardinal's nephew, that he will not have the estates of Canaples pass into the hands of a foreign upstart. He, forsooth, he, and at each utterance of the pronoun, he lunged with his forefinger in the direction of his son. This he is not ashamed to utter before Yvonne herself. "You compel me to do so," cried Eugene angrily. "I," ejaculated the Chevalier. "Did I compel you to come hither with your 'I will' and 'I will not'? Who are you, that you should give laws at Canaples? And he adds, sir," quoth the old knight excitedly, "that sooner than allow this marriage to take place, he will kill M. de Mancini." "I shall be happy to afford the opportunity," shouted Andrea, bounding forward. Eugene looked up quickly and gave a short laugh. Thereupon followed a wild hubbub. Everyone rushed forward, and everyone talked, even little Genevieve, louder than all the rest. "You shall not fight. You shall not fight," she cried, and her voice was so laden with command that all others grew silent, and all eyes were turned upon her. "What affair is this of yours, little one?" quoth Eugene. "'Tis is this," she answered, panting, "that you need fear no marriage twixt my sister and Andrea." In her eagerness, she had cast caution to the winds of heaven. Her father and brother stared askance at her. I gave an inward groan. "Andrea," echoed Eugene at last, "what is this man to you, that you speak thus of him?" The girl flung herself upon her father's breast. "Father," she sobbed, "dear father, forgive." The Chevalier's brow grew dark. Roughly he seized her by the arms and, holding her at arm's length, scanned her face. "What must I forgive?" he inquired in a thick voice. "What is M. de Mancini to you?" Some sinister note in her father's voice caused the girl to grow of a sudden calm and to assume a rigidity that reminded me of her sister. "He is my husband," she answered, and there was a note of pride, almost of triumph, in her voice. An awful silence followed the launching of that thunderbolt. Eugene stood with open mouth, staring now at Genevieve, now at his father. Andrea set his arm about his bride's waist, and her fair head was laid trustingly upon his shoulder. The Chevalier's eyes rolled ominously. At length he spoke in a dangerously calm voice. "How long is it? How long have you been wed?" "We were wed in Blois an hour ago," answered Genevieve. Something that was like a grunt escaped the Chevalier. Then his eye fastened upon me, and his anger boiled up. "You knew of this?" he asked, coming towards me. "I knew of it." "Then you lied to me yesterday." I drew myself up, stiff as a broomstick. "I do not understand," I answered coldly. "Did you not give me your assurance that M. de Mancini would marry Yvonne?" "I did not, monsieur. I did but tell you that he would wed your daughter." "And my foi, your daughter he is wed." "You have fooled me, Cellarat," he blazed out. "You, who have been sheltered by—" "Father," Yvonne interrupted, taking his arm. "M. de Liens has behaved no worse than have I, or any one of us, in this matter." "No!" he cried, and pointed to Andrea. "'Tis you who have wrought this infamy." Eugene, he exclaimed, turning a sudden to his son, you have a sword. Wipe out this shame. Shame, echoed Genevieve. Oh, father, where's the shame? If it were no shame for Andrea to marry Yvonne, surely. Silence, he thundered. Eugene. But Eugene answered him with a contemptuous laugh. You are quick enough to call upon my sword, now that things have not fallen out as you would have them. Where are your grooms now, monsieur? Insolent hound, cried his father indignantly. Then, letting fall his arms with something that was near akin to a sob, is there no one left to do aught but mock me, he groaned. But this weakness was no more than momentary. Out of my house, sir, he blazed, turning upon Andrea, and for a moment thought he would have struck him. Out of my house, you and this wife of yours. Father, sobbed Genevieve, with hands outstretched in entreaty. Out of my house, he repeated, and you also, Emdelines, away with you, go with the master you have served so well. And, turning on his heel, he strode towards the door. Father, dear father, cried Genevieve, following him. He slammed the door in her face for answer. With a moan, she sank down upon her knees, her frail body shaken by convulsive sobs. Jew, what a bridal morn was hers! Andrea and Yvonne raised her and led her to a chair. Eugene watched them with a cynical eye, then laughed brutally, and, gathering up his hat and cloak, he moved toward the balcony door and vanished. Is, Deline still there? Quoth Genevieve presently. I am here, madam. You had best set out, monsieur, she said. We shall follow soon, very soon. I took Andrea aside and asked him whether it was his intention to take his wife. He replied that they would go to Chambord, where they would remain for some weeks in the hope that the Chevalier might relent sufficiently to forgive them. Thereafter it was his purpose to take his bride home to a Sicilian domain. Our farewells were soon spoken, yet none the less warm, for all its brevity, was my leave-taking of Andrea, and our wishes for each other's happiness were as fervent as the human heart can shape. We little thought that we were not destined to meet again for years. Yvonne's adieu was cold and formal. So cold and formal that it seemed to rob the sunshine of its glory from me as I stepped out into the open air. After all, what mattered it? I was a fool to have entertained a single tender thought concerning her. Chapter 19. Of my return to Paris. Scant cause is there for me to tarry over the details of my return to Paris. A sad enough journey was it. As sad for my poor Michelot as for myself. Since he rode with one so dejected as I, things had gone ill, and I feared that when the cardinal heard the story things would go worse. For Mazarin was never a tolerant man, nor one to be led by the gospel of mercy and forgiveness. For myself, I foresaw the rope, possibly even the wheel, and 100 times a day I dubbed myself a fool for obeying the voice of honor with such punctiliousness when so grim a reward awaited me. What mood was on me, Gaston, whose honor had been long since besmirched and tattered until no outward semblance of honor was left? But swift in the footsteps of that question would come the answer, Yvonne. Aye, truly enough, it was because in my heart I had dared to hold a sentiment of love for her, the purest, nay, the only pure thing my heart had held for many a year, that I would set nothing vile to keep company with that sentiment, that until my sun should set, and already it dropped swiftly towards life's horizon, my actions should be the actions of such a man as might win Yvonne's affections. But let that be. This idle retrospective mood can interest you but little, nor can you profit from it, unless, indeed, it be by noting how holy and cleansing the heart of man is a love, albeit unrequited, that he bears a good woman. As we drew near Mung, where we lay on that first night of our journey, a light traveling chaise, going the same direction, passed us at a gallop. As it flashed by, I caught a glimpse of Yvonne de Canaples' swart face through the window. Whether the recognition was mutual, I cannot say, nor does it signify. When we reached the Hotel de la Couronne, half an hour later, we saw that same chaise disappearing round a corner of the street, whilst through the porte-cochere the hostler was leading a pair of horses, foam-flecked and steaming with sweat. Whither went Master Canaples at such a rate, and in a haste that caused him to travel day and night, to a goal he little looked for, or rather which, in the madness of his headlong rush, he could not see, so I was to learn ere long. Next day I awoke betimes, and setting my window wide to let in the fresh, clean-smelling air that, May morning, I made shift to dress. Save for the cackle of the poultry which had strayed into the courtyard, and the noisy yawns and sleep-laden ejaculations of the stable boy, who was drawing water for the horses, all was still, for it had not yet gone 5 o'clock. But of a sudden a door opened somewhere, and a step rang out, accompanied by the jangle of spurs, and with it came a sharp, unpleasant voice calling for its owner's horse. There was a familiar sound in those shrill accents that caused me to thrust my head through the casement, but I was quick to withdraw it, as I recognized in the gaily dressed little fellow below my old friend Malpertuis. I know not what impulse made me draw back, so suddenly the action was as much the child of instinct as of the lately acquired habit of concealing my face from the gaze of all who were likely to spread abroad the news that I still lived. From behind my curtains I watched Malpertuis ride out of the yard, saying, in answer to a parting question of the landlord, who had come upon the scene, that he would breakfast at Bugency. Then, as he rode down the street, he of a sudden raised his discordant voice and sang to the accompaniment of his horse's hoofs. And the burden of his song ran thus. I listened in amazement to his raven's voice. Whither was he bound? I asked myself. And whence a haste that made him set out fasting, with an anti-cardinalist ditty on his lips, and ride 2 leagues to seek a breakfast in a village that did not hold in where a dog might be housed in comfort? Like Yvonne de Canaples, he also traveled toward the goal that he little dreamed of, and so albeit the one went south and the other north, these 2 men were, between them, drawing together the thread of this narrative of mine, as anon you shall learn. We reached Paris at dusk 3 days later, and we went straight to my old lodging in the Rue Saint-Antoine. Coupry started and gasped upon beholding me, and not until I had cursed him for a fool in a voice that was passing human would he believe that I was no ghost. He too had heard the rumor of my death. I dispatched Michelot to the Palais Royal, where, without permitting his motive to transpire, he was to ascertain for me whether de Montresor was in Paris, whether he still dwelt at the Hôtel de Cloches, and at what hour he could be found there. Whilst he was away, I went up to my room, and there I found a letter which Coupry informed me had been left by a lackey a month ago, before the report that I had been killed had reached Paris, and since lain forgotten. It was a delicate note, to which still hung the ghost of a perfume. There were no arms on the seal, but the writing I took to be that of my aunt, the Duchesse de Chevreuse, and vaguely marveling what motive she could have had for communicating with me. I cut the silk. It was indeed from the Duchesse, but contained no more than a request that I should visit her at her hotel on the day following upon that on which she had written, adding that she had pleasing news for me. I thrust the note into my pocket with a sigh. Of what could it avail me now to present myself at her hotel? Her invitation was for a month ago. Since then she would likely enough have heard the rumor that had been current, and would have ceased to expect me. I caught myself wondering whether the news might cause her a pang of regret, and somehow methought this possible. For of all my relatives, Madame de Chevreuse was the only one, and she was but my aunt by marriage, who of late years had shown me any kindness or even recognition. I marveled what her pleasing news could be, and I concluded that probably she had heard of my difficulties, and wished once again to help me out of them. Well, my purse was hollow, indeed, at the moment, but I need not trouble her, since I was going somewhere where purses are not needed, on a journey to which no expenses are attached. In my heart, nevertheless, I blessed the gracious lady, who, for all the lies that the world may have told of her, was the kindest woman I had known, and the best, save one other. I was still musing when Michelot returned with the information that M. de Montresor was to be found at the Hôtel de Cloches, whither he had gone to sup a few minutes before. Straightway I set out, bidding him attend me, and muffled in my cloak, I proceeded at a brisk pace to the Rue de Fosses Saint-Germain, where the lieutenant's auberge was situated. I left Michelot in the common room, and, preceded by the plump little woman who owned the house, I ascended to Montresor's chamber. I found the young soldier at table, and, fortunately, alone. He rose as I entered, and as the hostess, retreating, closed the door, I doffed my hat, and letting fall my cloak revealed myself. His lips parted, and I heard the hiss of an indrawn breath as his astonished eyes fell upon my countenance. My laugh dispelled his doubts that I might be other than flesh and blood, yet not his doubts touching my identity. He caught up a taper and, coming forward, he cast a light on my face for a moment. Then, setting the candle back upon the table, he vented a surprise and an oath or two, which was natural enough in one of his calling. "'T is clear, Lieutenant,' quoth I, as I detached my sword from the baldric, "that you believe me dead. Fate willed, however, that I should be restored to life, and so soon as I recovered sufficient strength to undertake the journey to Paris, I set out. I arrived an hour ago, and here I am, to redeem my word of honor and surrender the sword and liberty which you but lent me." I placed my rapier on the table and waited for him to speak. Instead, however, he continued to stare at me for some moments, and when at last he did break the silence, it was to burst into a laugh that poured from his throat in rich, mellow peals as he lay back in his chair. My wrath arose. Had I traveled from Blois and done what I deemed the most honorable deed of my life, to be laughed at for my pains by a foppish young jackanapes of his Eminence's guards? Something of my displeasure must have seen reflected on my face, for of a sudden he checked his mirth. "Forgive me, M. de Luynes," he gasped. "Pardieu, 'tis no matter for laughter, and albeit I laugh with more zest than courtesy, I give you my word that my admiration for you vastly exceeds my amusement. M. de Luynes," he added, rising and holding out his hand to me, "there are liars in Paris who give you an evil name, men who laughed at me when they heard that I had given you leave to go on parole to St. Sulpice de Rho that night, trusting to your word of honor that you would return if you lived. His Eminence dubbed me a fool and went near to dismissing me from his service, and yet I have now the proof that my confidence was not misplaced, since even though you were believed to be dead, you did not hesitate to bring me your sword." "Monsieur, spare me," I exclaimed, for in truth his compliments waxed as irksome as had been his whilom merriment. He continued, however, his laudatory address, and when it was at last ended, and he paused exhausted alike in breath and brain, it was to take up my sword and return it to me with my parole, pronouncing me a free man, and advising me to let men continue to think me dead, and to withdraw from France. He cut short my half-protesting thanks, and calling the hostess, bade her set another cover, whilst me he invited to share his supper. And as we ate, he again urged upon me the advice that I should go abroad. "For by heaven," he added, "Mazarin has been as a raging beast since the news was brought him yesterday of his nephew's marriage." "How?" I cried. "He has heard already?" "He has indeed, and should he learn that your flesh still walks the earth, methinks it would go worse with you than it went even with Yvonne de Canaples." In answer to the questions with which I excitedly plied him, I drew from him the story of how Eugene had arrived the day before in Paris, and gone straight to the Palais Royal. M. de Montresor had been on guard in the antechamber, and in virtue of an excitement noticeable in Canaples' bearing, coupled with the ill odor wherein already he was held by Mazarin, the lieutenant's presence had been commanded in the cardinal's closet during the interview, for his Eminence was never like to acquire fame for valor. In his exultation at what had chanced, and at the manner in which Mazarin's chateau in Spain had been dispelled, Canaples used little caution, or even discretion, in what he said. In fact, from what Montresor told me, I gathered that the fool's eagerness to be the first to bear the tidings to Mazarin sprang from a rash desire to gloat over the cardinal's discomfiture. He had told his story insolently, almost derisively, and Mazarin's fury, driven beyond bounds already by what he had heard, became a very tempest of passion neath the lash of Canaples' impertinences. And, naturally enough, that tempest had burst upon the only head available, Yvonne de Canaples', and the cardinal had answered his jibes with interest by calling upon Montresor to arrest the fellow and bear him to the Bastille. When the astonished and sobered Canaples had indignantly asked upon what charge he was being robbed of his liberty, the cardinal had laughed at him, and answered with his never-failing axiom that he who sings pays. "You sang lustily enough just now," his Eminence had added, "and you shall pay by lodging a while in an oubliette of the Bastille, where you may lift up your voice to sing the De Profundis. Was my name not mentioned?" I anxiously inquired when Montresor had finished. "Not once. You may depend that I should have remarked it." After I had taken Canaples away, the cardinal, I am told, sat down and, still trembling with rage, wrote a letter which he straightway dispatched to the Chevalier Armand de Canaples, at Blois. "No doubt," I mused, "he attributes much blame to me for what has come to pass." "Not a doubt of it. This morning he said to me that it was a pity your wings had not been clipped before you left Paris, and that his misplaced clemency had helped to bring him great misfortunes. You see, therefore, M. Lins, that your sojourn in France will be attended with great peril. I advise you to try Spain. T is a martial country where a man of the sword may find honorable and even profitable employment. His counsel I deemed sound, but how follow it? Then of a sudden I bethought me of Madame de Chevreau's friendly letter. Doubtless she would assist me once again, and in such an extremity as this. And with the conception of the thought came the resolution to visit her on the morrow. That formed, I gave myself up to the task of drinking the Montresor under the table in abandon which had not been mine for months. In each goblet that I drained, methought I saw Yvonne's sweet face floating on the surface of the red Armagnac. It looked now sad, now reproachful. Still I drank on, and in each cup I pledged her. Chapter 20. Of how the Chevalier de Canaples became a frondeur. It wanted an hour or so to noon next day as I drove across the Pont Neuf in a closed carriage and was borne down the Rue Saint-Dominique to the portals of that splendid palace, facing the Jacobins, which bears the title of the Hôtel de Lens, and over the portals of which is carved the escutcheon of our house. Michelot, in obedience to the orders I had given him, got down only to be informed that Madame la Duchesse was in the country. The lackey who was summoned did not know where the lady might be found, nor when she might return to Paris. And so I was compelled to drive back almost despairingly to the Rue Saint-Antoine, and there lie concealed, nursing my impatience, until my aunt should return. Daily I sent Michelot to the Hôtel de Lens to make the same inquiry, and to return daily with the same dispiriting reply, that there was no news of Madame la Duchesse. In this fashion some 3 weeks wore themselves out, during which period I lay in my concealment, a prey to weariness unutterable. I might not venture forth save at night, unless I wore a mask, and as masks were no longer to be worn without attracting notice, as during the late king's reign, I dared not indulge the practice. Certainly my ennui was greatly relieved by the visits of Montresor, which grew very frequent, the lad appearing to conceive a kindness for me, and during those 3 weeks our fellowship at nights over a bottle or two engendered naturally enough a friendship and an intimacy between us. I had written to Andrea on the morrow of my return to Paris to tell him how kindly Montresor had dealt with me, and some 10 days later the following letter was brought me by the lieutenant, to whom, for safety, it had been forwarded. My very dear Gaston, I have no words wherewith to express my joy at the good news you send me, which terminates the anxiety that has been mine since you left us on the disastrous morning of our nuptials. The uncertainty touching your fate, the fear that the worst might have befallen you, and the realization that I, for whom you have done so much, might do naught for you in your hour of need, has been the one cloud to mar the sunshine of my own bliss. That cloud your letter has dispelled, and the knowledge of your safety renders my happiness complete. The Chevalier maintains his unforgiving mood, as no doubt doth also my Lord Cardinal. But what to me are the frowns of either, so that my lady smile? My little Genevieve is yet somewhat vexed in spirit at all this, but I am teaching her to have faith in time, the patron saint of all lovers who follow not the course their parents set them, and so that time may be allowed to intercede and appeal to the parent heart with the potent prayer of a daughter's absence, I shall take my lady from Chambord some 3 days hence. We shall travel by easy stages to Marseilles, and there take ship for Palermo. And so, dear trusty friend, until we meet again, fare you well, and may God hold you safe from the wickedness of man, devil, and my Lord Cardinal. For all that you have done for me, no words of mine can thank you. But should you determine to quit this France of yours, and journey to Palermo after me, you shall never want a roof to shelter you or a board to sit at, so long as roof and board are owned by him who signs himself, in love at least, to your brother, Andrea de Mancini. With a sigh, I set the letter down. A sigh of love and gratitude it was. A sigh also of regret for the bright, happy boy who had been the source alike of my recent joys and sorrows, and whom I thought I was not likely to see again for many a day, since the peaceful vegetation of the Sicilian home held little attraction for me, a man of action. It was on the evening of the last Sunday in May, whilst the bell of the Jesuits close by was tinkling out its summons to vespers, that Montresor burst suddenly into my room with the request that I should get my hat and cloak and go with him to pay a visit. In reply to my questions, Monseigneur's letter to Armand de Canaples, he said, has borne fruit already. Come with me, and you shall learn how. He led me past the Bastille and up the Rue de Tournelles to the door of an unpretentious house, upon which he knocked. We were admitted by an old woman to whom Montresor appeared to be known, for, after exchanging a word or two with her, he himself led the way upstairs and opened the door of a room for me. By the melancholy light of a single taper burning upon the table, I beheld a fair-sized room containing a curtained bed. My companion took up the candle, and stepping to the bedside, he drew apart the curtains. Lying there, I beheld a man whose countenance, despite its pallor and the bloody bandages about his brow, I recognized as that of the little spitfire Malpertuis. As the light fell upon his face, the little fellow opened his eyes, and upon beholding me at his side, he made a sudden movement which wrung from him a cry of pain. "Lie still, monsieur," said Montresor quietly. But for all the lieutenant's remonstrances, he struggled up into a sitting posture, requesting Montresor to set the pillows at his back. "Thank God you are here, M. de Luynes," he said. "I learned at Canaples that you were not dead." "You have been at Canaples?" "I was a guest of the Chevalier for 12 days. I arrived there on the day after your departure." "You," I ejaculated. "Pray, what took you, Canaples?" "What took me there?" he echoed, turning his feverish eyes upon me, almost with fierceness. "The same motive that led me to join hands with that ruffian St. Aubin when he spoke of waging war against Mancini. The same motive that led me to break with him when I saw through his plans, and when the abduction of Mademoiselle was on foot. The same motive that made me come to you and tell you of the proposed abduction, so that you might interfere if you had the power, or cause others to do so if you had not." I lay back in my chair and stared at him. Was this, then, another suitor of Yvonne de Canaples, and were all men mad with love of her? Presently he continued. "When I heard that St. Aubin was in Paris, having apparently abandoned all hope in connection with Mademoiselle, I obtained a letter from M. de la Rochefoucauld, who is an intimate friend of mine, and armed with this I set out. As luck would have it, I got embroiled in the streets of Blois with a couple of cardinalist gentlemen who chose to be offended by a lampoon of the Fronde that I was humming. I am not a patient man, and I am even indiscreet in moments of choler. I ended by crying, 'Down with Mazarin and all his creatures,' and I would of a certainty have had my throat slit had not a slight and elegant gentleman interposed, and, exercising a wonderful influence over my assailants, extricated me from my predicament. This gentleman was the Chevalier de Canaples. He was strangely enough in a mood to be pleased by an anti-cardinalist ditty, for his rage against Andrea de Mancini, which he took no pains to conceal, had extended already to the cardinal, and from morn till night he did little else but revile the whole Italian brood, as he chose to dub the cardinal's family. I recognized the old knight's weak, vacillating character in this, a creature of moods that, like the vane on a steeple, turns this way or that as the wind blows. "I crave your patience, M. de Luynes," he continued, "and beg of you to hear my story so that you may determine whether you will save the Canaples from the danger that threatens them. I only ask that you dispatch a reliable messenger to Blois. But hear me out first. In virtue as much of La Rochefoucauld's letters as of the sentiments which the Chevalier heard me express, I became the honored guest at his chateau. 3 days after my arrival, I sustained a shock by the unexpected appearance at Canaples of St. Aubin. The Chevalier, however, refused him admittance, and baffled, the Marquis was forced to withdraw. But he went no farther than Blois, where he hired himself a room at the List of France. The Chevalier hated him as a mad dog hates water, almost as much as he hated you. He spoke often of you, and always bitterly. Before I knew what I had said, "And Mademoiselle?" I burst out. "Did she ever mention my name?" Malpertuis looked up quickly at the question, and a wan smile flickered round his lips. "Once she spoke of you to me, pityingly, as one might speak of a dead man whose life had not been good." Yes, I broke in. "It matters little. Your story, M. Malpertuis." After I had been at the chateau 10 days, we learnt that Eugene de Canaples had been sent to the Bastille. The news came in a letter penned by His Eminence himself, a bitter, viperish letter, with a covert threat in every line. The Chevalier's anger went white-hot as he read the disappointed cardinal's epistle. His Eminence accused Eugene of being a frondeur. M. de Canaples, whose politics had grown sadly rusted in the country, asked me the meaning of the word. I explained to him the petty squabbles between court and parliament, in consequence of the extortionate imposts and of Mazarin's avariciousness. I avowed myself a partisan of the Fronde, And within 3 days the Chevalier, who but little time before had sought an alliance with the cardinal's family, had become as rabid a frondeur as M. de Gondi, as fierce an anti-cardinalist as M. de Beaufort. I humored him in his new madness, with the result that ere long from being a frondeur in heart, he thirsted to become a frondeur in deeds, and he ended by begging me to bear a letter from him to the coadjutor of Paris, wherein he offered to place at M. de Gondi's disposal towards expenses of the civil war which he believed to be imminent, as, indeed, it is, the sum of 60,000 livres. Now, albeit I had gone to Canaples for purposes of my own, and not as an agent of M. le Coadjuteur's, still, for many reasons, I saw fit to undertake the Chevalier's commission, and so, bearing the letter in question, which was hot and unguarded, and charged with endless treasonable matter, I set out 4 days later for Paris, arriving here yesterday. I little knew that I had been followed by St. Aubin. His suspicions must have been awakened, I know not how, and clearly they were confirmed when I stopped before the coadjutor's house last night. I was about to mount the steps, when of a sudden I was seized from behind by half a dozen hands and dragged into a side street. I got free for a moment and attempted to defend myself, but besides St. Aubin there were 2 others. They broke my sword and attempted to break my skull, in which they went perilously near succeeding, as you see, albeit half swooning. I had yet sufficient consciousness left to realize that my pockets were being emptied, and that at last they had torn open my doublet and withdrawn the treasonable letter from the breast of it. I was left bleeding in the kennel, and there I lay for nigh upon an hour until a passerby succored me and carried out my request to be brought hither and put to bed. He ceased, and for some moments there was silence, broken only by the wounded man's labored breathing, which argued that his narrative had left him fatigued. At last I sprang up. "The Chevalier de Canaples must be warned," I exclaimed. "Tea is an ugly business," muttered Montresor. "I'll wager 100 that Mazarin will hang the Chevalier if he catches him just now." "He would not dare," cried Maupertuis. "Not dare?" echoed the lieutenant. "The man who imprisoned the princes of Condé and Conti and the Duke of Beaufort. Not dare hang a provincial knight, with never a friend at court. Pah! Monsieur, you do not know Cardinal Mazarin." I realized to the full how likely Montresor's prophecy was to be fulfilled, and before I left Maupertuis, I assured him that he had not poured his story into the ears of an indifferent listener, and that I would straightway find means of communicating with Canaples. Chapter 21 of the bargain that St. Aubin drove with my Lord Cardinal. From the wounded man's bedside, I wended my steps back to the Rue Saint-Antoine, resolved to start for Blois that very night. And beside me walked Montresor, with bent head, like a man deep in thought. At my door, I paused to take my leave of the lieutenant, for I was in haste to have my preparations made and to be gone. But Montresor appeared not minded to be dismissed thus easily. "What plan have you formed?" he asked. "The only plan there is to form, to set out for Canaples at once." "Hum," he grunted, and again was silent. Then, suddenly throwing back his head, "Par la mort Dieu," he cried. "I care not what comes of it. I'll tell you what I know. Lead the way to your chamber, M. d'Alins, and delay your departure until you have heard me." Surprised as much by his words as by the tone in which he uttered them, which was that of a man who is angry with himself, I passively did as I was bidden. Once within my little antechamber, he turned the key with his own hands, and pointing to the door of my bedroom, "In there, monsieur," quoth he. "We shall be safe from listeners." Deeper grew my astonishment at all this mystery, as we passed into the room beyond. "Now, M. d'Alins," he cried, flinging down his hat, "for no apparent reason I am about to commit treason. I am about to betray the hand that pays me. If no reason exists, why do so evil a deed?" I inquired calmly. "I have learnt during our association to wish you well. Montresor, if by telling me that which your tongue burns to tell, you shall have cause for shame, the door is yonder. Go before harm is done, and leave me alone to fight my battle out." He stood up, and for a moment he seemed to waver, then dismissing his doubts with an abrupt gesture, he sat down again. "There is no wrong in what I do. Right is with you, M. d'Alins, and if I break faith with the might I serve, it is because that might is an unjust one. I do but betray the false to the true, and there can be little shame in such an act. Moreover, I have a reason, but let that be." He was silent for a moment, then he resumed. Most of that which you have learned from Malpertuis tonight, I myself could have told you. Yes, St. Aubin has carried Canaples' letter to the cardinal already. I heard from his lips today, for I was present at the interview, how the document had been wrested from Malpertuis. For your sake, so that you might learn all he knew, I sought the fellow out, and having found in the Rue de Tournelles, I took you thither. In a very fever of excitement, I listened. To take up the thread of the story where Malpertuis left off, let me tell you that St. Aubin sought an audience with Mazarin this morning, and by virtue of a note which he desired an usher to deliver to his eminence, he was admitted, the first of all the clients that for hours had thronged the anteroom, as in the instance of the audience to Yvonne de Canaples. So upon this occasion did it chance that the cardinal's fears touching St. Aubin's purpose had been roused, for he bade me stand behind the curtains in his cabinet. The Marquis spoke bluntly enough, and with rude candor he stated that since Mazarin had failed to bring the Canaples estates into his family by marriage, he came to set before his eminence a proof so utter of Canaples' treason that it would enable him to snatch the estates by confiscation. The cardinal may have been staggered by St. Aubin's bluntness, but his avaricious instincts led him to stifle his feelings and bid the Marquis to set this proof before him. But St. Aubin had a bargain to drive, a preposterous one methought. He demanded that in return for his delivering into the hands of Mazarin the person of Armand de Canaples together with an incontestable proof that the Chevalier was in league with the Frondeurs, and had offered to place a large sum of money at their disposal, he was to receive as recompense the domain of Canaples on the outskirts of Blois, together with 1/3 of the confiscated estates. At first Mazarin gasped at his audacity, then laughed at him, whereupon St. Aubin politely craved his eminence's permission to withdraw. This the cardinal, however, refused him, and bidding him remain, he sought to bargain with him. But the Marquis replied that he was unversed in the ways of trade and barter, and that he had no mind to enter into them. From bargaining, the cardinal passed on to threatening, and from threatening to whining, and so on until the end, St. Aubin preserving a firm demeanor. The comedy was played out, and Mazarin fell in with his proposal and his terms. Mille diables, I cried, and as St. Aubin set out, he starts tomorrow, and I go with him. When finally the cardinal had consented, the Marquis demanded and obtained from him a promise in writing, signed and sealed by Mazarin, that he should receive 1/3 of the Canaples estates and the domain on the outskirts of Blois, in exchange of the body of Armand de Canaples, dead or alive, and a proof of treason sufficient to warrant his arrest and the confiscation of his estates. Next, seeing in what regard the seigneurs held by the people of Blois, and fearing that his arrest might be opposed by many of his adherents, the Marquis has demanded a troop of 20 men. This Mazarin has also granted him, entrusting the command of the troop to me, under St. Aubin. Further, the Marquis has stipulated that the greatest secrecy is to be observed, and has expressed his purpose of going upon this enterprise disguised and masked, for as he rightly opines, when months hence he enters into possession of the domain of Canaples in the character of purchaser, did the Blaisois recognize in the man who sold the Chevalier, his life would stand in hourly peril. I heard him through patiently enough. Yet when he stopped, my pent-up feelings burst all bonds, and I resolved there and then to go in quest of that Judas St. Aubin, and make an end of this plotting for all time. But Montresor restrained me, showing me how futile such a course must prove, and how I risked losing all chance of aiding those at Canaples. He was right. First I must warn the Chevalier. Afterwards I would deal with St. Aubin. Someone knocked at that moment, and with the entrance of Michelat, my talk with Montresor came perforce to an end. For Michelat brought me the news that for days I had been awaiting. Madame de Chevreuse had returned to Paris at last, but for Montresor's remonstrances, it is likely that I should have set out forthwith to wait upon her. I permitted myself, however, to be persuaded that the lateness of the hour would render my visit unwelcome, and so I determined in the end, albeit grudgingly, to put off my departure for Blois until the morrow. Noon had but struck from Notre Dame. Next day, as I mounted the steps of the Hôtel de Lens, my swagger, and that brave suit of pearl gray velvet with silver lace, bore me unchallenged past the gorgeous Suisse, who stood majestic in the doorway. But for the first mincing lackey I chanced upon, more was needed to gain me an audience. And so, as I did not choose to speak my name, I drew a ring from my finger and bade him bear it to the Duchesse. He obeyed me in this, and presently returning, he bowed low and begged of me to follow him. For, as I had thought, albeit Madame de Chevreuse might not know to whom that ring belonged, yet the arms of Louise carved upon the stone had sufficed to ensure an interview. I was ushered into a pretty boudoir, hung in blue and gold, which overlooked the garden, and wherein, reclining upon a couch, with a book of Bois Robert's verses in her white and slender hand, I found my beautiful aunt, of this famous lady, who is a cherished friend and more than sister of Austria. Much has been written, much that is good, and more, far more, that is ill. For those who have a queen for friends shall never lack for enemies. But those who have praised and those who have censured have at least been at one touching her marvelous beauty. At the time whereof I write, it is not possible that she could be less than 46, and yet her figure was slender and shapely and still endowed with the grace of girlhood, her face delicate of tint and little marked by time, or even by the sufferings of which, in the late king's reign, Cardinal de Richelieu had subjected her. Her eyes were blue and peaceful as a summer sky. Her hair was the color of ripe corn. He would be a hardy guesser who set her age at so much as 30. My appearance she greeted by letting fall her book and lifting up her hands. The loveliest in France. She uttered a little cry of surprise. "Is it really you, Gaston?" she asked, albeit it was growing wearisome to be thus greeted by all to whom I showed myself. Yet I studied courtesy in my reply, and then, neath the suasion of her kindliness, I related all that had befallen me since first I had journeyed to Blois, in Andrea de Mancini's company, withholding, however, all allusions to my feelings toward Yvonne. Why betray them, when they were doomed to be stifled in the breast that begot them? But Madame de Chevreuse had not been born a woman, and lived 46 years to no purpose. And this maid with as many suitors as Penelope, is she very beautiful? She inquired slyly. France does not hold her equal, I answered, falling like a simpleton into the trap she had set me. This to me, quoth she archly. Fi donc, Gaston, your evil ways have taught you as little gallantry as dissimulation. And her merry ripple of laughter showed me how in 6 words I betrayed that which I had been at such pains to hide. But before I could, by protestations, plunge deeper than I stood already, the Duchesse turned the conversation adroitly to the matter of that letter of hers, wherein she had bidden me wait upon her. A cousin of mine, one Marion de Lens, who, like myself, had, through the evil of his ways, become an outcast from his family, was lately dead. Unlike me, however, he was no adventurous soldier of fortune, but a man of peace, with an estate in Provence that had a rent roll of 5,000 livres a year. On his deathbed he had cast about him for an heir, unwilling that his estate should swell the fortunes of the family that in life had disowned him. Into his ear some kindly angel had whispered my name, and the memory that I shared within the frowns of our house, and that my plight must be passing pitiful, had set up a bond of sympathy between us, which had led him to will his lands to me, of Madame de Chevreuse, who clearly was a patron saint of those of her first husband's nephews who chanced to tread ungodly ways. My cousin Marion had besought that she should see to fulfillment of his last wishes. My brain reeled beneath the first shock of that unlooked-for news. Already I saw myself transformed from a needy adventurer into a gentleman of fortune, and methought my road to Yvonne lay open, all obstacles removed. But swiftly there followed the thought of my own position, and truly it seemed that a cruel irony lay in the manner wherein things had fallen out, since that I declare myself to be alive and claim the Provence estates. The cardinal's claws would be quick to seize me. Thus much I told Madame de Chevreuse. But her answer cheered me, and said much for my late cousin's prudence. Nay, she cried, Marion was ever shrewd, knowing that men who live by the sword, as you have lived, are often wont to die by the sword, and that suddenly at times he has made provision that in the event of your being dead his estate shall come to me, who have been the most indulgent of his relatives. This, my dear Gaston, has already taken place, for we believed you dead, and therein fortune has been kind to you, for now, while receiving the revenues of your lands, which the world will look upon as mine, I shall contrive that they reach you wherever you may be, until such a time as you may elect to come to life again. Now, but for the respect in which I held her, I could have taken the pretty Duchesse in my arms and kissed her. Restraining myself, however, I contented myself by kissing her hand, and told her the journey I was going, then craved another boon of her. No matter what the issue of that journey, and whether I went alone or accompanied, I was determined to quit France and repair to Spain. There I would abide until the Parliament, the court, or the knife of some chance assassin, or even nature herself should strip Mazarin of his power. Now, at the court of Spain, it was well known that my aunt's influence was vast, and so the boon I craved was that she should aid me to a position in the Spanish service that would allow me during my exile to find occupation and perchance renown. To this my aunt most graciously acceded, and when at length I took my leave, with such gratitude in my heart that what words I could think of seemed but clumsily to express it, I bore in the breast of my doublet a letter to Don Juan de Cordova, a noble of great prominence at the Spanish court, and in the pocket of my haute de chausses a rouleau of 200 gold pistoles, as welcome as they were heavy. Chapter 22 of my second journey to Canaples. An hour after I had quitted the Hotel de Lens, Michelot and I left Paris by the Barrier Saint-Michel and took the Orleans road. How different it looked in the bright June sunshine to the picture which it had presented to our eyes on that February evening, for months ago, when last we had set out upon that same journey. Not only in nature had a change been wrought, but in my very self. My journey then had been aimless, and I had scarcely known whither I was bound, nor had I fostered any great concern thereon. Now I rode in hot haste with a determined purpose, a man of altered fortunes and altered character. Into Choisy we clattered at a brisk pace, but at the sight of the end of the Connétable such memories surged up that I was forced to draw rein and call for a cup of Anjou, which I drank in the saddle. Thereafter we rode without interruption through Longjumeau, Arpajon, and Étriquet, and so well did we use our horses that as night fell we reached Étampes. From inquiries that Michelot had made on the road, we learned that no troop such as that which rode with St. Aubin had lately passed that way, so that tea was clear we were in front of them. But scarce had we finished supper in a little room which I had hired at the Gros Paon, when from below, a stamping of hoofs, the jangle of arms, and the shouts of many men told me that we were overtaken. Clearly I did not burn with a desire to linger, but rather it seemed to me that although night had closed in, black and moonless, we must set out again and push on to Montherville, albeit our beasts were worn in the distance a good 3 leagues. With due precaution we effected our departure, and thereafter had a spur been needed to speed us on our way, that spur we had in the knowledge that St. Aubin came close upon our heels. At Montherville we slept, and next morning we were early afoot. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon we had reached Orleans, whence, with fresh horses, we pursued our journey as far as Meung, where we lay that night. There we were joined by a sturdy rascal whom Michelot enlisted into my service, seeing that not only did my means allow, but the enterprise upon which I went might perchance demand another body servant. This recruit was a swart, powerfully built man of about my own age, trusty, and a lover of hard knocks, as Michelot, who had long counted him among his friends, assured me. He owned the euphonious name of Abden. I spent 20 pistoles in suitable raiment and a horse for him, and as we left Meung next day, the knave cut a brave enough figure that added not a little to my importance to have at my heels. This, however, so retarded our departure that night had fallen by the time we reached Blois. Still our journey had been a passing swift one. We had left Paris on a Monday, the 4th of June. I have good cause to remember, since on that day I entered both upon my 32nd year and my altered fortunes. On the evening of Wednesday we reached Blois, having covered a distance of 43 leagues in less than 3 days. Bidding Michelot carry my valise to the hostelry of the Vigne d'Or, and there await my coming, I called to Abin to attend me, and rode on, jaded and travel-stained though I was, to Canaples, realizing fully that there was no time to lose. Old Gilbert, who came and answered my knock at the door of the chateau, looked askance when he beheld me, and when I bade him carry my compliments to the Chevalier, with a message that I desired immediate speech of him on a matter of the gravest moment, he shook his gray head and protested that it would be futile to obey me. Yet, in the end, when I had insisted, he went upon my errand, but only to return with disturbed countenance, to tell me that the Chevalier refused to see me. But I must speak to him. Gilbert, I exclaimed, setting foot upon the top step, I have traveled expressly from Paris. The man stood firm and again shook his head. I beseech you not to insist, monsieur. Le Chevalier has sworn to dismiss me if I permit you to set foot within the chateau. Mille diables, this is madness. I seek to serve him. I cried, my temper rising fast. At least, Gilbert, will you tell mademoiselle that I am here and that I may carry no more messages for you, monsieur, he broke in. Listen, There is M. Le Chevalier. In reality, I could hear the old knight's voice, loud and shrill with anger, and a moment later Louis, his attendant, came across the hall. "Gilbert," he commanded harshly, "close the door. The night air is keen." My cheeks aflame with anger, I still made one last attempt to gain an audience. "Master Louis," I exclaimed, "will you do me the favor to tell him de Canaples?" "You are wasting time, monsieur," he interrupted. "M. de Canaples will not see you. He bids you close the door, Gilbert." "Pardieu, he shall see me." "The door, Gilbert." I took a step forward, but before I could gain the threshold, the door was slammed in my face, and as I stood there, quivering with anger and disappointment, I heard the bolts being shot within. I turned with an oath. "Come, Abden," I growled, as I climbed once more into the saddle. "Let's leave the fool to the fate he has chosen." Chapter 23. Of how St. Aubin came to Blois. In silence we rode back to Blois. Not that I lacked matter for conversation. Anger and chagrin at the thought that I had come upon this journey to earn naught, but an insult and to have a door slammed in my face made my gorge rise, until it went near to choking me. I burned to revile Canaples aloud, but Abbin's was not the ear into which I might pour the hot words that welled up to my lips. Yet if silent, the curses that I heaped upon the Chevalier's crassness were none the less fervent, and to myself I thought with grim relish of how soon and how dearly he would pay for the affront he had put upon me. That satisfaction, however, endured not long, for presently I bethought me of how heavily the punishment would fall upon Yvonne, and yet of how she would be left to the mercy of St. Aubin, whose warrant for Mazarine would invest with almost any and every power at Canaples. I ground my teeth at the sudden thought, and for a moment I was on the point of going back and forcing my way into the chateau at the sword point if necessary, to warn and save the Chevalier in spite of himself and unthanked. It was not in such a fashion that I had thought to see my mission to Canaples accomplished. I had dreamed of gratitude, and gratitude unbars the door to much. Nevertheless, whether or not I earned it, I must return and succeed where for want of insistence I had failed a while ago. Of a certainty I should have acted thus, but that at the very moment upon which I formed the resolution, Abden drew my attention to a dark shadow by the roadside not 20 paces in front of us. This proved to be the motionless figure of a horseman. As soon as I was assured of it, I reined in my horse, and taking a pistol from the holster, I leveled it at the shadow, accompanying the act by a sonorous, "Who goes there?" The shadow stirred, and Michelot's voice answered me. "'Tis I, monsieur. They have arrived. I came to warn you." "Who has arrived?" I shouted. "The soldiers. They are lodged at the list of France." An oath was the only comment I made as I turned the news over in my mind. I must return to Canaples. Then another thought occurred to me. The Chevalier was capable of going to extremes to keep me from entering his house. He might, for instance, greet me with a blunderbuss. It was not the fear that deterred me, but the fear that did a charge let get mixed with my poor brains before I had said what I went to say, matters would be no better, and there would be one poor knave the less to adorn the world. "What shall we do, Michelot?" I groaned, appealing in my despair to my henchman. "Might it not be well to seek speech with M. de Montresor?" quoth he. I shrugged my shoulders. Nevertheless, after a moment's deliberation, I determined to make the attempt. If I succeeded, something might come of it. And so I pushed on to Blois with my knaves close at my heels. Up the Rue Vieille we proceeded with caution, for the hostelry of the Vignet d'Or, where Michelot had hired me a room, fortunately overlooking the street, fronted the list of France, where St. Aubin and his men were housed. I gained that room of mine without mishap, and my first action was to deal summarily with fat and well-roasted capon which the landlord set before me. For an empty stomach is a poor comrade in a desperate situation. That meal, washed down with the best part of a bottle of red Anjou, did much to restore me alike in body and in mind. From my open window, I gazed across the street at the list of France. The door of the common room, opening upon the street, was set wide, and across the threshold came a flood of light in which there flitted the black figures of maybe a dozen amazed rustics, drawn thither for all the world as bats are drawn to a glare. And there they hovered with open mouths and stupid eyes, hearkening to the din of voices that floated out on the tranquil air, the snatches of ribald songs, the raucous bursts of laughter, the clink of glasses, the clank of steel, the rattle of dice, and the strange soldier oaths that fell with every throw, and which to them must have sounded almost as words of some foreign tongue. Whilst I stood by my window, the landlord entered my room, and coming up to me, "Thank heaven they are not housed at the Vigna door," he said. "It will take Maitre Bernard a week to rid his house of the stench of leather. They are part of a stray company that is on its way to fight the Spaniards," he informed me, "but methinks they will be forced to spend 2 or 3 days at Blois. Their horses are sadly jaded and will need that rest before they can take the road again, thanks to the pace at which their boy of an officer must have led them. There is a gentleman with them who wears a mask. T has whispered that he is a prince of the blood who has made a vow not to uncover his face until this war be ended, in expiation of some sin committed in mad Paris." I heard him in silence, and when he had done, I thanked him for his information. So, this was the story that the crafty St. Aubin had spread abroad to lull suspicion touching the real nature of their presence until their horses should be fit to undertake the return journey to Paris, or until he should have secured the person of Yvonne de Canaples. Toward 11 o'clock, as the lights in the hostelry opposite were burning low, I descended and made my way out into the now deserted street. The troopers had apparently seen fit, or else been ordered, to seek their beds, for the place had grown silent, and a servant was in the act of making fast the door for the night. The porte-cochere was half closed, and a man carrying a lantern was making fast the bolt, whistling aimlessly to himself. Through the half of the door that was yet open, I beheld a window from which the light fell upon a distant corner of the courtyard. I drew near the fellow with the lantern, in whom I recognized René, the hostler, and as I approached he flashed the light upon my face. Then with a gasp, "Lins," he exclaimed, "remember me from the time when I had lodged at the List of France, 3 months ago." "S.H.," I whispered, pressing a Louis d'Or into his hand. "Whose window is that, René?" And I pointed toward the light. "That," he replied, "is the room of the lieutenant and the gentleman in the mask." "I must take a look at them, René, and whilst I am looking I shall search my pocket for another Louis. Now let me in." "I dare not, monsieur. Maitre Bernard may call me, and if the doors are not closed—" "Dame," I broke in, "I shall stay but a moment, but—" "And you will have easily earned a Louis d'Or. If Bernard calls you, peste, tell him that you have let fall something and that you are seeking it. There, let me pass." I got past him at last, and made my way swiftly toward the other end of the quadrangle. As I approached, the sound of voices smote my ear, for the lighted window stood open. I stopped within half a dozen paces of it, and climbed onto the step of a coach that stood there. Thence I could look straight into the room, whilst the darkness hid me from the eyes of those I watched. 3 men there were: Montresor, the sergeant of his troop, and a tall man dressed in black, and wearing a black silk mask. This I concluded to be St. Aubin, despite the profusion of fair locks that fell upon his shoulders, concealing, I rightly guessed, his natural hair, which was as black as my own. It was a cunning addition to his disguise, and one well calculated to lead people on to the wrong scent hereafter. Presently, as I watched them, St. Aubin spoke, and his voice was that of a man whose gums are toothless, or else whose nether lip is drawn in over his teeth whilst he speaks. Here again the dissimulation was as effective as it was simple. "So, that is concluded," were the words that reached me. "Tomorrow we will install our men at the chateau, for while we remain here it is preposterous to lodge them in an inn. On the following day, I hope that we may be able to set out again. If we could obtain fresh horses—" began the sergeant, when he of the mask interrupted him. "Sangju, think you my purse is bottomless? We return as we came, with the cardinal's horses. What signify a day or 2 after all? Come, call the landlord to light me to my room." I had heard enough, but more than that, whilst I listened, an idea had of a sudden sprung up in my mind which did away with the necessity of gaining speech with Montresor, a contingency, moreover, that now presented insuperable difficulties. So I got down softly from my perch and made my way out of the yard, and, after fulfilling my part of the bargain with René, across to the Vigna d'Or into my room, there to sit and mature the plan that of a sudden I had conceived. Chapter 24. Of the passing of St. Aubin. Dame, what an ado there was next day in Blois. When the news came that the troopers had installed themselves at the Suitors de Canaples, and that the Chevalier had been arrested for treason by order of the Lord Cardinal, and that he would be taken to Paris, and probably the scaffold, men gathered in little knots at street corners, and with sullen brows and threatening gestures they talked of the affair. And the more they talked, the more clouded grew their looks, and more than one anti-cardinalist pasquinade was heard in Blois that day. Given a leader, those men would have laid hands upon pikes and muskets and gone to the Chevalier's rescue. As I observed them, the thought did cross my mind that I might contrive a pretty fight in the rose garden of Canaples were I so inclined. And so inclined I should, indeed, have been but for the plan that had come to me like an inspiration from above, and which methought would prove safer in the end. To carry out this plan of mine, I quitted Blois at nightfall with my 2 knaves, having paid my reckoning at the list of France, and given out that we were journeying to Tours. We followed the road that leads to Canaples, until we reached the first trees bordering the park. There I dismounted, and, leaving Abden to guard the horses, I made my way on foot, accompanied by Michelot, toward the garden. We gained this, and were on the point of quitting the shadow of the trees. With a sudden, by the light of the crescent moon, I beheld a man walking in one of the alleys, not 100 paces from where we stood. I had but time to seize Michelot by the collar of his pourpoint and draw him towards me. But as he trod precipitately backwards, a twig snapped 'neath his foot with a report that in the surrounding stillness was like a pistol shot. I caught my breath as he who walked in the garden stood still, his face, wrapped in the shadows of his hat, turned towards us. "Who goes there?" he shouted. Then, getting no reply, he came resolutely forward. Whilst I drew a pistol wherewith to welcome him, did he come too near. On he came, and already I had brought my pistol to a level with his head, when fortunately he repeated his question, "Who goes there?" And this time I recognized the voice of Montresor, the very man I could then most wish to meet. "Hist, Montresor," I called softly. "'Tis Eileen's." "So," he exclaimed, coming close up to me, "you have reached Canaples at last." "At last?" I echoed. "Whom have you there?" he inquired abruptly. "Only Michelot." Bid him fall behind a little. When Michelot had complied with this request, "You see, Indolins," quoth the officer, "that you have arrived too late." There was a certain coldness in his tone that made me seek by my reply to sound him. "Indeed, I trust not, my friend. With your assistance, I hope to get him de Canaples from the clutches of St. Aubin." He shook his head. "It is impossible that I should help you," he replied with increasing coldness. "Already once for your sake have I broken faith to those who pay me by setting you in a position to forestall St. Aubin and get him de Canaples away before his arrival. Unfortunately, you have dallied on the road, Delines, and Canaples is already a prisoner, a doomed one, I fear. Is that your last word, Montresor?" I inquired sadly. "I am sorry," he answered in softened tones, "but you must see that I cannot do otherwise. I warned you, more you cannot expect of me." I sighed, and stood musing for an instant. Then, "You are right, Montresor. Nevertheless, I am still grateful to you for the warning you gave me in Paris. God pity and help Canaples. Adieu, Montresor. I do not think that you will see me again." He took my hand, but as he did so, he pushed me back into the shadow from which I had stepped to proffer it him. "Pest!" he ejaculated. "The moon was full upon your face, and did St. Aubin chance to look out, he must have seen you." I followed the indication of his thumb, and noted the lighted window to which he pointed. A moment later he was gone, and as I joined Michelot, I chuckled softly to myself. For 2 hours or more I sat in the shrubbery, conversing in whispers with Michelot, and watching the lights in the chateau die out one by one, until St. Aubin's window, which opened onto the terrace balcony, was the only one that was not wrapped in darkness. I waited a little while longer. Then rising, I cautiously made a tour of inspection. Peace reigned everywhere, and the only sign of life was a sentry, who with musket on shoulder paced in front of the main entrance, a silent testimony of St. Aubin's mistrust of the Blaisois and of his fears of a possible surprise. Satisfied that everyone slept, I retraced my steps to the shrubbery, where Michelot awaited me, watching the square of light, and after exchanging word with him, I again stepped forth. When I was halfway across the intervening space of garden, treading with infinite precaution, a dark shadow obscured the window, which a second later was thrown open. Crouching hastily behind a boxwood hedge, I watched St. Aubin, for I guessed that he it was, as he leaned out and gazed skywards. For a little while he remained there. Then he withdrew, leaving the casement open, and presently I caught the grating of a chair on the parquet floor within. If ever the gods favored mortal, they favored me at that moment. Stealthily as a cat, I sprang toward the terrace, the steps to which I climbed on hands and knees. Stooping, I sped silently across it until I had gained the flower bed immediately below the window that had drawn me to it. Crouching there, for did I stand upright my chin would be on a level with the sill, I paused to listen for some moments. The only sound I caught was a rustle, as of paper. Emboldened, I took a deep breath, and standing up I gazed straight into the chamber. By the light of 4 tapers in heavy silver sconces, I beheld St. Aubin seated at a table littered with parchments, over which he was intently poring. His back was towards me, and his long black hair hung straight upon his shoulders. On the table, amid the papers, lay his golden wig and black mask, and on the floor in the center of the room, his back and breast of blackened steel and his sword. It needed but little shrewdness to guess those parchments before him to be legal documents touching the Canaples estates, and his occupation that of casting up exactly what profit he would reap from his infamous work of betrayal. So intent was the hound upon his calculations that my cautious movements passed unheeded by him as I got astride of the window ledge. It was only when I swung my right leg into the room that he turned his head, but before his eyes reached me, I was standing upright and motionless within the chamber. I have seen fear of many sorts writ large upon the faces of men of many conditions, from the awe that blanches the cheek of the boy soldier when first he hears the cannon thundering to the terror that glazes the eye of the vanquished swordsman who at every moment expects the deadly point in his heart. But never had I gazed upon a countenance filled with such abject, ghastly terror as that which came over St. Aubin's when his eyes met mine that night. He sprang up with an inarticulate cry that sank into something that I can but liken to the rattle which issues from the throat of expiring men. For a second he stood where he had risen, then terror loosened his knees, and he sank back into his chair. His mouth fell open, and the trembling lips were drawn down to corners like those of a sobbing child. His cheeks turned whiter than the lawn collar at his throat, and his eyes, wide open in a horrid stare, were fixed on mine, and, powerless to avert them, he met my gaze, cold, stern, and implacable. For a moment we remained thus, and I marveled greatly to see a man whose heart, if full of evil, I had yet deemed stout enough, stricken by fear into so parlous and pitiful a condition. Then I had the explanation of it as he lifted his right hand and made the sign of the cross, first upon himself, then in the air, whilst his lips moved, and I guessed that to himself he was muttering some prayer of exorcising purport. There was the solution of the terror, sweat that stood out in beads upon his brow. He had deemed me a specter, the specter of a man he believed to have foully done to death on a spot across the lower visible from the window at my back. At last he sufficiently mastered himself to break the awful silence. "What do you want?" he whispered. Then, his voice gaining power as he used it, "Speak," he commanded. "Man or devil, speak." I laughed for answer, harshly, mockingly, for never had I known a fiercer, crueler mood. At the sound of that laugh, satanical though may have been its ring, he sprang up again, and unsheathing a dagger, he took a step towards me. "We shall see of what you are made," he cried. "If you blast me in the act, I'll strike you." I laughed again, and raising my arm, I gave him the nozzle of a pistol to contemplate. "Stand where you are, St. Aubin, or by the God above us, I'll send your ghost a wandering," quoth I coolly. My voice, which I take it had nothing ghostly in it, and still more the levelled pistol, which of all implements is the most unghostly, dispelled his dread. The color crept slowly back to his cheeks, and his mouth closed with a snap of determination. "Is it indeed you, Master Meddler?" he said. "Past. I thought you dead these 3 months. And you are overcome with joy to find that you were in error, and Marquis? We Louins die hard." "It seems so indeed," he answered with a cool effrontery past crediting in one who but a moment ago had looked so pitiful. "What do you seek at Canaples?" "Many things, Marquis, you among others." "You have come to murder me," he cried, and again alarm overspread his countenance. Hoity-toity, Marquis. We do not all follow the same trade. Who talks of murder? Faugh! Again he took a step towards me, but again the nozzle of my pistol drove him back. To have pistoled him there, and then, as he deserved, would have brought the household about my ears, and that would have defeated my object. To have fallen upon him and slain him with silent steel would have equally embarrassed me, as you shall understand anon. You and I had a rendezvous at St. Sulpice de Roe, I said calmly, to which you came a band of hired assassins. For this you deserve to be shot like the dog you are. But I have it in my heart to be generous to you. I added in a tone of irony. Come, take up your sword. To what purpose? Do you question me? Take up your sword, man, and do my bidding. Thus shall you have a slender chance of life. Refuse, and I pistol you without compunction. So now put on that wig and mask. When he obeyed me in this, now listen, St. Alban, I said, you and I are going together to that willow copse, whither 3 months ago you lured Yvonne de Canaples for the purpose of abducting her. On that spot you and I shall presently face each other sword in hand, with none other to witness our meeting save God, in whose hands the issue lies. That is your chance. At the first sign that you meditate playing me any tricks, that chance is lost to you. And I tapped my pistol significantly. Now climb out through that window. When he had done so, I bade him stand 6 paces away whilst I followed, and to discourage any foolish indiscretion on his part one again showed him my pistol. He answered me with an impatient gesture, and by the light that fell on his face I saw him sneer. Come on, you fool, he snarled, and I've done threatening. I'll talk to you in the copse, and tread softly lest you arouse the sentry on the other side. Rejoiced to see the man so wide awake in him, I followed him closely across the terrace, and through the rose garden to the bank of the river. This we followed until we came at last to the belt of willows, where, having found a suitable patch of even and springy turf, I drew my sword and invited him to make ready. Will you not strip? He inquired sullenly. I do not think so, I answered. The night air is sharp. Nevertheless, do you make ready as best you deem fit, and that speedily, monsieur. With an exclamation of contempt, he divested himself of his wig, mask, and doublet. Then, drawing his sword, he came forward and announced himself at my disposal. As well you may conceive, we wasted no time in compliments, but straightway went to work, and that with a zest that drew sparks from our rapiers at the first contact. The Marquis attacked me furiously, and therein lay his only chance. For a fierce, rude swordplay that is easily dealt with in broad daylight is vastly discomposing in such pale moonshine as lighted us. I defended myself warily, for of a sudden I had grown conscious of the danger that I ran did he once by luck or strength get past my guard with that point of his which in the spare light I could not follow closely enough to feel secure. 'Neath the fury of his onslaught I was compelled to break ground more than once, and each time he was so swift to follow up his advantage that I had ne'er a chance to retaliate. Still fear or doubt of the issue, I had none. I needed but to wait until the Marquis's fury was spent by want of breath, to make an end of it, and presently that which I waited for came about. His attack began to lag in vigor, and the pressure of his blade to need less resistance, whilst his breathing grew noisy as that of a broken-winded horse. Then with the rage of a gambler who loses at every throw, he cursed and reviled me with every thrust or lunge that I turned aside. My turn was come, yet I held back, and let him spend his strength to the utmost drop, whilst with my elbow close against my side, and by an easy play of wrist, I diverted each murderous stroke of his point that came again and again from my heart. When at last he had wasted in blasphemies what little breath his wild exertions had left him, I let him feel on his blade the twist that heralded my first riposte. He caught the thrust and retreated a step, his blasphemous tongue silenced, and his livid face bathed in perspiration. Cruelly I toyed with him then, and with every disengagement I made him realize that he was mastered, and that if I withheld the coup de grace it was but to prolong his agony. And to add to the bitterness of that agony of his, I derided him whilst I fenced. With a recitation of his many sins I mocked him, showing him how ripe he was for hell, and asking him how it felt to die unshriven with such a load upon his soul. Goaded to rage by my bitter words, he grit his teeth, and gathered what rags of strength were left him for a final effort, and before I knew what he was about, he had dropped onto his left knee, and with his body thrown forward and supported within a foot of the ground by his left arm, he came like a snake under my guard with his point directed upwards. So swift had been this movement, and so unlooked for, that had I not sprung backward in the very nick of time, this narrative of mine had ne'er been written. With a jeering laugh, I knocked aside his sword, but even as I disengaged a thrust at him, he knelt up and caught my blade in his left hand, and for all that it ate its way through the flesh to the very bones of his fingers, he clung to it with that fierce strength and blind courage that is born of despair. Then, raising himself on his knees again, he struck at me wildly. I swung aside, and as his sword, missing its goal, shot past me, I caught his wrist in a grip from which I contemptuously invited him to free himself. With that began a fierce tugging and panting on both sides, which, however, was of short duration, for presently my blade, having severed the last sinew of his fingers, was set free. Simultaneously, I let go his wrist, pushing his arm from me so violently that in his exhausted condition it caused him to fall over on his side. In an instant, however, he was up and at me again. Again our swords clashed, but once only. It was time to finish. With a vigorous disengagement, I got past his feeble guard and sent my blade into him full in the middle of his chest and out again at his back until a foot or so of glittering steel protruded. A shudder ran through him, and his mouth worked oddly, while spasmodically he still sought, without avail, to raise his sword. Then, as I recovered my blade, a half-stifled cry broke from his lips, and throwing up his arms, he staggered and fell in a heap. As I turned him over to see if he were dead, his eyes met mine, and were full of piteous entreaty. His lips moved, and presently I caught the words, "I am sped, Louise." Then struggling up, and in a louder voice, "A priest," he gasped. "Give me a priest, Louise. Jesu, have mare." A rush of blood choked him and cut short his utterance. He writhed and twitched for a moment. Then his chin sank forward and he fell back, death darkening his limbs and glazing the eyes which stared hideously upwards at the cold, pitiless moon. Such was the passing of the Marquis César de Saint Aubin. Chapter 25. Play acting. For a little while I stood gazing down at my work, my mind full of the unsolvable mysteries of life and death. Then I bethought me that time stood not still for me, and that something yet remained to be accomplished ere my evening's tasks were done. And forthwith I made shift to do a thing at the memory of which my blood is chilled and my soul is filled with loathing even now, albeit the gulf of many years separates me from that June night at Canaples. To pass succinctly over an episode on which I have scant heart to tarry, suffice it you to know that using my sash as a rope, I bound a heavy stone to St. Aubin's ankle. Then lifting the body in my arms, I half dragged, half bore across the little stretch of intervening sward to the water's edge, and flung it in. As I write, I have a hideous picture in my mind, and again I can see St. Aubin's ghastly face grinning up at me through the moonlit waters, until at last it was mercifully swallowed up in their black depths, and naught but a circling wavelet that spread swiftly across the stream was left to tell of what had chanced. I dare not dwell upon the feelings that assailed me as I stooped to rinse the blood from my hands, nor yet of the feverish haste wherewith I tore my blood-stained doublet from my back, and hurled it wide into the stream. For all my callousness, I was sick and unmanned by that which had befallen. No time, however, did I waste in mawkish sentiment, but setting my teeth hard, I turned away from the river and back to the trampled ground of our recent conflict. There, with no other witness save the moon, I clad myself in the Marquis's doublet of black velvet. I set his mask of silk upon my face, his golden wig upon my head, and over that his sable hat with its drooping feather. Next I buckled on his sword belt, wherefrom hung his rapier that I had sheathed. In Blois that day I had taken precaution, knowing the errand upon which I came, to procure myself haute de chausse of black velvet, and black leather boots with gilt spurs that closely resembled those which St. Aubin had worn in life. Now, as I have already written, St. Aubin and I were of much the same build and stature, and so methought with confidence that he would have shrewd eyes, indeed, who could infer from my appearance that I was other than the same masked gentleman who had that very day ridden into Canaples at the head of a troop of his Eminence's guards. I made my way swiftly back along the path that St. Aubin and I had together trodden but a little while ago, and passed the chateau until I came to the shrubbery where Michelot, faithful to the orders I had given him, awaited my return. From his concealment, he had seen me leave the chateau with the Marquis, and as I suddenly loomed up before him now, he took me for the man whose clothes I wore, and naturally enough assumed that it had befallen Gaston de Liens. Of a certainty I had been pistoled by him had I not spoken in time. I lingered but to give him certain necessary orders. Then, whilst he went off to join Abden in seat of fulfillment, I made my way stealthily, with eyes keeping watch around me, across the terrace, and through the window into the room that St. Aubin had left to follow me to his death. The taper still burned, and in all respect the chamber was as it had been. The back and breast pieces still lay upon the floor, and on the table the littered documents. The door, I ascertained, had been locked on the inside, a precaution which St. Aubin had no doubt taken, so that none might spy upon the work that busied him. I closed and made fast a window. Then I bethought me that, being in ignorance of the whereabouts of St. Aubin's bedchamber, I must perforce spend the night as best I could within that very room. And so I sat me down and pondered deeply over the work that was to come, the part one was about to play, and the details of its playing. In this manner did I while away perchance an hour. Through the next one I must have slept, for I awakened with start to find 3 tapers spent, and the last one spluttering, and in the sky the streaks that heralded the summer dawn. Again I fell to thinking. Again I slept, and woke again to find the night gone and the sunlight on my face. Someone knocked at the door, and that knocking vibrated through my brain and set me wide awake. Indeed, it was as a signal to uplift the curtain and let my play-acting commence. Hastily I rose and shot a glance at the mirror to see that my wig hung straight and that my mask was rightly adjusted. I started at my own reflection, from a thought that from the glass, T was St. Aubin who looked at me, as I had seen him look the night before when he had donned those things at my command. "Hola there within!" came Montresor's voice. "Monsieur le Capitaine." A fresh shower of blows descended on the oak panels. I yawned with prodigious sonority and overturned a chair with my foot, then bracing myself for the ordeal, through which I looked to what scant information I possessed and my own mother wit. To bear me successfully, I strode across to admit my visitor, muffling my voice, as I had heard St. Aubin do at the inn, by drawing my nether lip over my teeth. "Pardieu!" quoth I, as I opened the door. "It seems, Lieutenant, that I must have fallen asleep over those musty documents." I trembled as I watched him, waiting for his reply, and I thanked heaven that in the role I had assumed a mask was worn, not only because it hid my features, but because it hid the emotions which these might have betrayed. "I was beginning to fear," he replied coldly, and without so much as looking at me, "that worse had befallen you." I breathed again. "You mean?" "Pooh, nothing," said he half contemptuously. "Only methinks, T were well whilst we remain at Canaples, that you do not spend your nights in a room within such easy access of the terrace. Your advice no doubt is sound, but as I shall not spend another night at Canaples, it comes too late." "You mean, monsieur?" "That we set out for Paris today." He shrugged his shoulders. "Oh, say, I have just visited the stables, and there are not 4 horses fit for the journey, so that unless you have in mind the purchase of fresh animals—" "Pish! My purse is not bottomless." I broke in, repeating the very words that I heard St. Aubin utter. "So you said once before, monsieur. Still, unless you are prepared to take that course, the only alternative is to remain here until the horses are sufficiently recovered. But perhaps you think of walking," he added with a sniff. "Such is your opinion, your time being worthless and it being of little moment where you spend it. I have conceived a plan." "Ah! Has it not occurred to you that the danger which threatens us and which calls for protection of a troop is only on this side of the Loire, where the Blaisois might be minded to attempt a rescue of the Chevalier? But over yonder, Chevalier on the Chambord side, who cares a fig for the Lord of Canaples or his fate? None, is it not so?" He made an assenting gesture, whereupon I continued. "This being so, I bethought me that it will suffice if I take but 3 or 4 men and the sergeant as an escort, and cross the river with our prisoner after nightfall, traveling along the opposite shore until we reach Orleans. What think you, Lieutenant?" He shrugged his shoulders again. "T is you who command here," he answered with apathy. "Not I. Nevertheless, do you not think the plan a safe one, as well as one that will allay his eminence's very natural impatience?" "Oh, it is safe enough, I doubt not," he replied coldly. "Your enthusiasm determines me," quoth I, with an irony that made him wince. "And we will follow the plan, since you agree with me touching its excellence. But keep the matter to yourself until an hour or so after sunset." He bowed, so utterly my dupe that I could have laughed at him. Then, there's a little matter that I would mention, he said. Mademoiselle de Canaples has expressed a wish to accompany her father to Paris and has asked me whether this will be permitted her. My heart leaped. Surely the gods fought on my side. I cannot permit it, I answered icily. Monsieur, you are pitiless, he protested in a tone of indignation for which I would gladly have embraced him. I feigned to ponder. The matter needs consideration. Tell mademoiselle that I will discuss it with her at noon, if she will condescend to await me on the terrace. I will then give her my definite reply. And now, Lieutenant, let us breakfast. As completely as I had duped Montresor, did I presently dupe those of the troopers with whom I came in contact, among others the sergeant, and anon the Chevalier himself. From the brief interview that I had with him, I discovered that whilst he but vaguely suspected me to be St. Aubin, and when I say he suspected me, I mean he suspected him whose place I had taken, he was, nevertheless, aware of the profit which his captor, whoever he might be, derived from this business. It soon grew clear to me from what he said that St. Aubin had mocked him with it whilst concealing his identity, that he had told him how he had obtained from Maupertuis the treasonable letter, and of the bargain which it had enabled him to strike with Mazarine. I did not long remain in his company, and, deeming the time not yet ripe for disclosures, I said little in answer to his lengthy tirades, which had, I guessed, for scope to trap me into betraying the identity he but suspected. It wanted a few minutes to noon as I left the room in which the old nobleman was confined, and by the door which a trooper was stationed, musket on shoulder. With every pulse a throbbing at the thought of my approaching interview with mademoiselle, I made my way below and out into bright sunshine, the soldiers I chanced to meet saluting me as I passed them. On the terrace, I found mademoiselle already awaiting me. She was standing, as often I had seen her stand, with her back turned towards me and her elbows resting upon the balustrade. But as my steps sounded behind her, she turned and stood gazing at me with a face so grief-stricken and pale that I burned to unmask and set her torturing fears at rest. I doffed my hat and greeted her with a silent bow, which she contemptuously disregarded. My lieutenant tells me, mademoiselle, said I in my counterfeited voice, that it is your desire to bear monsieur your father company upon this journey of his to Paris. With your permission, sir, she answered in a choking voice. It is a matter for consideration, mademoiselle, I pursued. There are in it many features that may have escaped you, and which I shall discuss with you, if you will honor me by stepping into the garden below. Why will not the terrace serve? Because I may have that to say which I would not have overheard. She knit her brows and stared at me as though she would penetrate the black cloth that hid my face. At last she shrugged her shoulders, and letting her arms fall to her side in a gesture of helplessness and resignation. Soit, I will go with you, was all she said. Side by side we went down the steps as a pair of lovers might have gone, save that her face was white and drawn, and that her eyes looked straight before her, and never once, until we reached the gravel path below, at her companion. Side by side we walked along one of the rose-bordered alleys, until at length I stopped. Mademoiselle, I said, speaking in the natural tones of that good-for-naught Gascondins, I have already decided, and you have my permission to accompany your father. At the sound of my voice she started, and with her left hand clutching at the region of her heart, she stood, her head thrust forward, and on her face the look of one who is confronted with some awful doubt. That look was brief, however, and swift to replace, it was one of hideous revelation. In God's name, who are you? She cried in accents that bespoke internal agony. Already you have guessed it, mademoiselle, I answered, and I would have added that which should have brought comfort to her distraught mind, when, you, she gasped in a voice of profound horror. You, the Judas who has sold my father to the cardinal for a paltry share in our estates. And I believe that mask of yours to hide the face of St. Aubin. Her words froze me into a stony mass of insensibility. There was no logic in my attitude. I see it now. Appearances were all against me, and her belief no more than justified. I overlooked all this, and instead of saving time by recounting how I came to be there, and thus delivering her from the anguish that was torturing her, I stood, dumb and cruel, cut to the quick by her scorn and her suspicions that I was capable of such a thing as she imputed, and listening to the dictates of an empty pride that prompted me to make her pay full penalty. "Oh, God pity me," she wailed. "Have you naught to say?" Still I maintained my mad, resentful silence. And presently, as one who muses, "You," she said again. "You, whom I?" She stopped short. "Oh, the shame of it," she moaned. Reason at last came uppermost, and as in my mind I completed her broken sentence, my heart gave a great throb, and I was thawed to a gentler purpose. "Mademoiselle," I exclaimed, but even as I spoke, she turned, and sweeping aside her gown that it might not touch me, she moved rapidly towards the steps we had just ascended. Full of remorse, I sprang after her. "Mademoiselle, hear me," I cried, and put forth my hand to stay her. Thereat she wheeled round and faced me, a blaze of fury in her gray eyes. "Dare not to touch me," she panted. "You thief, you hound." I recoiled, and like one turned to stone, I stood and watched her mount the steps, my feelings swaying violently between anger and sorrow. Then my eye fell upon Montresor standing on the topmost step, and on his face there was a sneering, insolent smile which told me that he had heard the epithet she had bestowed upon me. Albeit I sought that day another interview with Yvonne, I did not gain it, and so I was forced to sun myself in solitude upon the terrace. But I cherished for my consolation that broken sentence of hers, whereby I read that the coldness which she had evinced for me before I left Canaples had only been assumed. And presently, as I recalled what talks we had had, and one in particular from which it now appeared to me that her coldness had sprung, a light seemed suddenly to break upon my mind, as perchance it hath long ago broken upon the minds of those who may happen upon these pages, and whose wits in matters amorous are of a keener temper than were mine. I who in all things have been arrogant, presumptuous, and self-satisfied, had methought erred for once through over-humility. And, indeed, even as I sat and pondered on that June day, it seemed to me a thing incredible that she whom I accounted the most queenly and superb of women should have deigned to grant a tender thought to one so mean, so far beneath her as I had ever held myself to be. Chapter 26. Reparation. Things came to pass that night as I had planned, and the fates which of late had smiled upon me were kind unto the end. Soon after 10, and before the moon had risen, a silent procession wended its way from the chateau to the river. First went Montresor and 2 of his men. Next came the Chevalier with Mademoiselle, and on either side of them a trooper, whilst I, in headpiece and back and breast of steel, went last with Mathurin, the sergeant, who warmly praised the plan I had devised for conveyance of M. de Canaples to Paris without further loss of time. 2 boats, which I had caused to be secretly procured, were in readiness, and by these a couple of soldiers awaited us, holding the bridles of 8 horses, one of which was equipped with a lady's saddle. 5 of these belonged, or had belonged, to the Chevalier, whilst the others were 3 of those that had brought the troop from Paris, and which I, in the teeth of all protestations, had adjudged sufficiently recovered for the return journey. The embarkation was safely effected. M. de Canaples and Mademoiselle in one boat with Montresor, Mathurin, and myself. The sergeant took the oars. Montresor and I kept watch over our prisoner. In the other boat came the 4 troopers, who were to accompany us, and one other who was to take the boats, and Montresor and them back to Canaples, for the lieutenant was returning, so that he might, with the remainder of the troop, follow us to Paris so soon as the condition of the horses would permit it. The beasts we took with us were swimming the stream, guided and upheld by the men in the other boat. Just as the moon began to show her face, our bow grated on the shore at the very point where I had intended that we should land. I sprang out and turned to assist Mademoiselle, but, disdaining my proffered hand, she stepped ashore unaided. The Chevalier came next, and after him Montresor and Mathurin. A while we waited until the troopers brought their boat to land. Then when they had got the snorting animals safely ashore, I bade them look to the prisoner and requested Montresor and Mathurin to step aside with me, as I had something to communicate to them. Walking between the pair, I drew them some 20 paces away from the group by the water, towards a certain thicket in which I had bidden Michelot await me. "It has occurred to me, messers," I began, speaking slowly and deliberately as we paced along. "It has occurred to me that despite all the precautions taken to carry out my Lord Cardinal's wishes, a work at least in which you yourselves have evinced a degree of zeal that I cannot too highly commend to his eminence, the possibility yet remains of some mistake of trivial appearance, of some slight flaw that might yet cause a miscarriage of those wishes." They turned towards me, and although I could not make out the expressions of their faces in the gloom, yet I doubted not but that they were puzzled ones at that lengthy and apparently meaningless harangue. The sergeant was the first to speak, albeit I am certain that he understood the less. I venture, le capitaine, to think that your fears, though very natural, are groundless. Say you so? Quoth I, with a backward glance to assure myself that we were screened by the trees from the eyes of those behind us. Say you so? Well, mayhap you are right, though you speak of my fears being groundless. I alluded to some possible mistake of yours and de Montresor's, not mine. And by heaven, a monstrous flaw there is in this business. For if either you so much as whisper, I'll blow your brains out. And to emphasize these words, as sinister as they were unlooked for, I raised both hands suddenly from beneath my cloak, and clapped the cold nose of a pistol to the head of each of them. I was obeyed as men are obeyed, who thus uncompromisingly prove the force of their commands. Seeing them resigned, I whistled softly, and in answer there was a rustle from among the neighboring trees, and presently 2 shadows emerged from the thicket. In less time than it takes me to relate it, Montresor and his sergeant found themselves gagged, and each securely bound to a tree. Then, with Michelot and Abden following a short distance behind me, I made my way back to the troopers, and, feigning to stumble as I approached, I hurtled so violently against 2 of them that I knocked the pair headlong into the stream. Scarce was it done, and almost before the remaining 3 had realized it, there was a pistol at the head of each of them and sweet promises of an eternal hereafter being whispered in their ears. They bore themselves with charming discretion, and like lambs we led them each to a tree and dealt with them as we had dealt with their officers, whilst the Chevalier and his daughter watched us, bewildered and dumbfounded at what they saw. As soon as the other 2 had crawled, all unconscious of the fates of their comrades, out of the river, we served them also in a like manner, bidding Abden and Michelot lead the horses, and still speaking in my assumed voice, I desired Mademoiselle and the Chevalier, who had not yet sufficiently recovered from his bewilderment to have found his tongue, to follow me. I led the way up the gentle slope to the spot where our first victims were pinioned. Montresor's comely young face looked monstrous wicked in the moonlight, and his eyes rolled curiously as he beheld me. Stepping up to him, I freed him of his gag, an act which I had almost regretted a moment later, for he cleared his throat with so lusty a torrent of profanity that methought the heavens must have fallen on us. At last, when he was done with that, before you leave me in this plight, de Saint Aubin, quoth he, perchance you will satisfy me with an explanation of your unfathomable deeds and of this violence. Saint Aubin, exclaimed the Chevalier. Saint Aubin, cried Yvonne, and albeit wonder rang in both their voices, yet their minds I knew went different ways. No, not Saint Aubin, I answered with a laugh, and putting aside all counterfeit of speech. Par la mort Dieu, I know that voice, cried Montresor. Mayhap indeed, and know you not this face? And as I spoke, I whipped away my wig and mask, and thrust my countenance close up to his. Thunder of God! Ejaculated the boy. Then, pardieu, he added, there is Michelot. How came I not to recognize him? Since you would not assist me, Montresor, you see I was forced to do without you. But Saint Aubin, he gasped, where is he? In heaven, I hope, but I doubt it sadly. You have killed him? There and then, as briefly as I might, I told him, whilst the others stood by to listen, how I had come upon the Marquis in the chateau the night before and what had passed thereafter. And now, I said as I cut his bonds, it grieves me to charge you an impolite errand to his eminence, but I'll not return to him, he burst out. I dare not. Mon Dieu, you have ruined me, Louise. Then come with me, and I'll build your fortunes anew and on a sounder foundation. I have an influential letter in my pocket that should procure us fortune in the service of the King of Spain. He needed little pressing to fall in with my invitation. So we set the sergeant free, and him instead I charged with a message that must have given Mazarin endless pleasure when it was delivered to him. But he had the Canaples estates wherewith to console himself in his never-failing maxim that ci canta pega. Touching the Canaples estates, however, he did not long enjoy them, for when he went into exile, 2 years later, the Parliament returned them to their rightful owner. The Chevalier de Canaples approached me timidly. Monsieur, quoth he, I have wronged you very deeply, and this generous rescue of one who has so little merited your aid truly puts me to so much shame that I know not what thanks to offer you. Then offer none, monsieur, I answered, taking his proffered hand. Moreover, time presses, and we have a possible pursuit to baffle. So the horse, messieurs. I assisted mademoiselle to mount, and she passively suffered me to do her this office, having no word for me, and keeping her face averted from my earnest gaze. I sighed as I turned to mount the horse Michelot held for me, but methinks tea was more a sigh of satisfaction than of pain. All that night we traveled, and all next day until Tours was reached towards evening. There we halted for a sorely needed rest and for fresh horses. 3 days later we arrived at Nantes, and a week from the night of the Chevalier's rescue, we took ship from that port to Santander. That same evening, as I leaned upon the taffrail watching the distant coastline of my beloved France, whose soil meseemed I was not like to tread again for years, Yvonne came softly up behind me. "Monsieur," she said in a voice that trembled somewhat, "I have, indeed, misjudged you. The shame of it has made me hold aloof from you since we left Blois. I cannot tell you, monsieur, how deep that shame has been, or with what sorrow I have been beset for the words I uttered at Canaples. Had I but paused to think. Nay, mademoiselle, 'tis was all my fault, I swear. I left you overlong the dupe of appearances. But I should not believe them so easily. Say that I am forgiven, monsieur," she pleaded. "Tell me what reparation I can make." "There is one reparation that you can make if you are so minded," I answered, "but 'tis a lifelong reparation." They were bold words, indeed, but my voice played the coward and shook so vilely that it bereft them of half their boldness. But, Dieu, what joy, what ecstasy was mine to see how they were read by her, to remark the rich, warm blood dye in her cheeks in a bewitching blush, to behold the sparkle that brightened her matchless eyes as they met mine. Yvonne! Gaston! She was in my arms at last, and the work of reparation was begun whilst together we gazed across the sun-gilt sea towards the fading shores of France. If you be curious to learn how, guided by the gentle hand of her who plucked me from the vile ways that in my old life I had trodden, I have since achieved greatness, honor, and renown, history will tell you